Welcome, everybody. Today is December 8th, 2020. It is really an honor to be here. We're so happy to see all of you. Thank you for tuning in. It's been a very intense year, and we're so glad we get to spend this quality time with you, kind of digesting some of the events of this past year and looking at some of the influences in 2021. I've been watching Westworld, the series Westworld, which really captures some of the heavy energies of this time, both the Saturn-Pluto sense of oppression and the hard struggle toward freedom, and also the Saturn-Uranus energies, the interplay of free will versus determination. Vikings is another very representative expression in the arts right now, and of course, Game of Thrones, Outlander, and so on. There's so many of you out there. This feels like Woodstock to us, but without the bad brown acid. It's hard to come up with, Saturn-Pluto comedy, but I did want to open with a joke or two. I found one, Gary Larson, a Far Side comic. So this is a couple emerging from a bomb shelter into an empty, burning wasteland. Thank God, Sylvia, we're alive. Gary Larson, Saturn semi-sextile Pluto. It kind of captures the grimness of this time, but also the perseverance, the endurance, the capacity to face difficult situations and endure. We're going to talk quite a bit about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. In these alignments, as Rick has, emphasized, Pluto can intensify the Saturn archetype. This can be a time of intense suffering. This began in 2018 and it goes through all of next year, 2021. Feelings of loss, failure, sense of no way out or no exit. And, for some of you tuning in, this could be the most difficult time of your life. These transits, if they're hitting a major part of your chart, can be some of the most difficult experiences of your lifetime. You have our complete sympathy. These are very difficult times, very alarming times in many ways too. The US election certainly brought out a lot of those feelings. Saturn acting on Pluto can activate Pluto. Many people are going through a feeling of titanic death rebirth struggle. Even apocalyptic feelings. The Jupiter alignment with the Saturn-Pluto tends to make it bigger. It amplifies and expands whatever it touches. And many people have commented, it is what has turned the epidemic into a pandemic, the sense of shared danger, shared death rebirth struggle. We can see the Saturn-Pluto in some ways as like a hard birth labor contraction bearing down on the collective psyche. And it's a very long birth, one that we've been in for perhaps 5,000 years. There are sort of birth processes within birth processes, but this is a very important one. The beginning of the patriarchal era around 3000 BC. And in a sense, we're crowning right now at this moment. And it's uncertain whether the baby will make it, the baby of the collective human consciousness, whether we will come out in one piece, but that's what's trying to happen. And we're all participating through our good work, through our deep self-exploration, through interacting with our own psyches in that collective process. Now, of course, the Saturn-Pluto is happening within the backdrop of the Uranus square Pluto, though it is now out of the 10-degree orb. We are in what Rick Tarnas calls the sunset effect, and we will probably be in that for several more years. This Uranus-Pluto square of the last 13 years, powerful evolutionary and revolutionary energies, themes of female empowerment, democratic and civil rights movements, ecological awareness, and so on. We'll be talking about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, issues of justice, fairness, the polarity between rich versus poor in our civilization, the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, titanic evolutionary processes, a sense of high drama, potential for power trips and power grabs. The Saturn square Uranus will be operative through the spring of 2003, and we've had it for much of 2020 as well. It tends to inflect experiences toward a tension between progressive and conservative elements of society. I think we can expect the culture wars to continue. I don't think that's any surprise to people. But Saturn-Uranus also works to force us to feel the tension and hold that tension and wait for a third kind of resolution or synthesis to emerge out of that tension. And then finally, the Jupiter square Uranus, which is operative now through the end of October, often brings sudden, dramatic quantum leaps, unexpected breakthroughs, resolution of difficult situations. It often has an unexpected, surprising quality, positive outcomes. And so this is a very blessed transit to have during this most intense of times. So we'll let people introduce themselves now on the panel. Thanks again for joining us for this very special night. I want to also thank Achyuta Bhava Dasa, formerly Adam Ellenboss, a great astrologer and a good citizen of the astrology community. I got the idea for this from watching his Saturn-Pluto panel discussion in January. Maybe some of you were involved in that. And also thanks to Rick Tarnas. All of us here have been directly or indirectly influenced by his incredible life work and the breakthroughs and developments in the field that he has brought and affected. So thank you, and I will now turn this over to Becca Tarnas.
Thank you so much, Ren, not just for that beautiful introduction to the different transits that we're in the midst of, but for envisioning and bringing together this panel. I know you've been conceiving of this for quite some time, and just really want to thank you for everything that you put into making it happen, as well as, just wanting to give my gratitude to my fellow panelists for being here. And I can't wait to hear what each of you have to say. So, James, Erica, Lisa, Kyle, Amber, this is an honor and a pleasure to be able to do this with all of you. And so just very briefly to introduce myself, my name is Becca Tarnas, and I'm a counseling astrologer. I have been running my private practice for about 6 years now. And I also teach at 2 different graduate institutions. I teach at Pacifica and at CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies. And I teach on the imagination and Jung's Red Book, archetypal cosmology, and transpersonal psychology. So yeah, that's just a short introduction to who I am and what I do. And I now want to invite James to introduce himself.
Thank you, Becca. My name is James Moran, and I'm a professional archetypal astrologer for the past 10 years, a student of Rick Tarnas for the past 10 years. I began studying with Stan Groff in the early 90s, and that set me off on a path of being a psychonaut and an avid meditator, and has brought me here. I'm at jamesmoran.org, and I have a webinar upcoming about the use of psychedelics and how archetypal astrology can be used as a sort of facilitator in the deep healing work involving psychedelics, and the implications of archetypal astrology for the global healing work that I'm sure we're going to be talking about today, that we're facing as a collective human species. Great. And I am going to be passing it to, I believe, Erica. Erica.
Aha, thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to everyone for the collaboration to put this together. And so I'm Erica Jones, and I'm a counseling astrologer at Real Imaginal Astrology. And you can find me at realimaginal.com. I offer individual consultations, and I've studied astrology since 2006, primarily with Richard Tarnas. where I got a master's degree with the program that he founded, Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness at CIIS, where Becca teaches now. And I really, in my consultation practice, I really like to invite a conversation between the human and the greater than human world as the many layers in which that can be conceived. And I really am interested in helping people find the sacred stories of their lives. And I hope that we'll touch on some of the sacred stories of humanity in our talk tonight, and perhaps also into personal implications for all of us under such intense transits and pressures. And as far as what I got going right now, I'm very excited to share word of a collaboration I'm developing with Angela Billings of Sacred Door. It's a new program called the Community Prism, Self-Care to Deepen Belonging in Community. And registration will be opening in a few weeks. And we will use astrology and dream work and other tools to cultivate symbolic sight, to sort of use the power of astrology and learn how to use the power of astrology to cultivate hindsight in this present moment, like a little glimpse of more objectivity and greater choice. I also offer dream work groups and community, which you can find on my website at realimaginal.com. And I am going to pass it now to Kyle. Hi, Kyle.
Hi, thanks, Erica. My name's Kyle Nicholas, and I've also been studying with Rick and everyone here. I've been working on a program called Archetypal Explorer for the past 7-ish years. I've got a software engineering background, and Cosmos and Psyche just kind of blew my mind open. And I've been working on this program. It's mainly it's like introductory people who want to do a sort of self-service practice. I built a horoscope chart and this timeline and a calendar and a bunch of other tools to visualize what's going on in the cosmos. And then Rick was very generous. He contributed his personal writings, which are unpublished, on all the different combinations. And Ren will contribute his book, The Archetypal Universe. And so that's been a project that has just sort of dominated my life in the best way. And yeah, so that's kind of what I've been working on. And I've been tracking COVID stuff all year and using the visualizations that I have. And so I'm going to present a bunch of data that way. And so happy to be here. And I believe next, let's see, Amber. There we go.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Hopefully I'm coming through okay. It looks like my internet is kind of unstable at the moment. Actually, it's kind of working. Okay. So I'm Amber Balk. I am a transpersonal psychologist. I also have a background in women's spirituality. So the primary influences in my work and in my life, I would say transpersonally would be the work of Stanislav Grof. And with the women's spirituality, it's more of the influence of feminist thought and theory, in particular, how that translates into awareness of power dynamics. And also kind of it fuels this desire to fuel my work with a drive to address oppression in various ways. So astrologically, I began studying astrology as a teenager, just very informally, and when I was 17, and then over time just began deepening my studies more and more. By 2008, I was getting very serious about it. And by 2013, I think, I was pretty entrenched in studying evolutionary astrology, and then more recently moved on to studying archetypal astrology. So, and then just more on a personal note, I wanted to start off by just saying that I was born in the South and have very deep roots in the South, even though I live on the West Coast now. But I was lucky to be born into the land that was sacred for thousands of years to my maternal ancestors, the land of the Mississippi River Valley. And I think that's a rare thing to be able to say these days. So I just want to acknowledge that, because ancestry is really on my radar, and I'm going to be sharing more about that later in the other rounds. But everything that I do, I hope, is a prayer of gratitude to all those who came before, and a prayer of hope to the future. So thank you. And I believe I am passing it on to Ren next.
Thanks, Amber. Yeah, great to be here again. I discovered Sakoyan and Acker's The Astrologer's Handbook in my parents' home in the August 1979 or early September. Turned out to be a very lucky book to stumble upon, and I've been interested deeply in astrology every day since that moment, fall of '79. About 3 months later, I went to Esalen Institute as a work scholar, and I had the very good fortune of having many conversations with Rick Tarnas over that year and in following years. And he really turned me on to the possibilities of astrology, the way that you could use it to understand both the processes in the psycho-spiritual unfolding, and also in the world of culture. And I was very impressed with that synthesis and that marriage. I was also fortunate to be in a month-long with Stan and Christina Groff starting in November 1980 when I was 20. And that also changed my life. Rick persuaded me to enroll in that workshop. We had a conversation in the Esalen garden, and he was telling me about the perinatal matrices, and is blowing my mind. And I got to be in that workshop with the Groffs. I just want to say thank you again to my mom, who lived at Esalen Institute for several years in the mid-'70s or early '70s, and really opened some doors for me there and gave me some roots there, which were very helpful. Thanks, Mom. So I eventually certified as a holotropic breathwork facilitator with the Groffs, and we do workshops up here in Victoria. I've written 3 books. Some of you maybe see The Pathways to Wholeness, The Archetypal Universe, and Oh Goddess just came out this summer. I'm also teaching an online class in what I call archetypal and holotropic astrology. It's a 10-month class that started in September, and I'll be doing a new class in this coming September. So thank you, and I'd like to turn this back to Becca.
So we're moving into our first round of what we're presenting, each presenting, and I wanted to just begin by invoking these planetary archetypes that we're all going to be speaking about. So to introduce particularly Saturn and Pluto, and then introduce Jupiter, because every time we talk about astrology, every time we talk about a planetary archetype, we really are invoking a primordial power of this universe. And so who are these planetary archetypes? And just wanting to create a space of inviting them into our virtual room here. So to begin with Saturn is the principle of constriction, contraction, hard work, discipline, structure. Saturn is the principle of time, the slow unfolding process of time. So the past, history, tradition, the weightiness of tradition. There's a heaviness, a gravity to Saturn. Saturn is what lays foundations. Saturn is what creates blocks and obstacles, what negates whatever it's in relationship to. And because of Saturn's relationship to time, it has to do with endings, with finitude, with mortality, with death and dying. And it is all of these challenging sides of Saturn where we feel blocked, negated, hemmed in, where we fail, where we fall flat on our faces, that something is forged within us, a strength, a spine is forged. And Saturn is what gives us a sense of responsibility, of commitment, of the capacity to see something through to the end, and allows us to show up as mature adults, what gives us the wisdom of experience. So as difficult as Saturn can be, we need Saturn because we live in Saturn's realm of the world of physical material reality. So that's some on the planetary archetype of Saturn. And now to invoke or call in Pluto. Pluto is the archetype of the underworld, of the depths, of transformation and transmutation. Pluto symbolizes the death, rebirth mystery, destruction and creation. It is the elemental powers of nature that we can recognize, whether it's in the shifting of tectonic plates or the eruption of a volcano that destroys everything in its path and yet lays the ground, the fertile ground for new life to eventually come forward. It is the instinctual drive, whether that's in the hunting of a wild animal or in the sexual drive of the libido. And so Pluto transforms and intensifies, drives to extremes, whatever it is in relationship to. And Saturn and Pluto, these two planets, have been in a conjunction with each other, meaning that they have been visibly next to each other in the sky since the beginning of 2018, as Ren was saying. And so when these two planetary archetypes come together, we see unfolding in world events periods of crisis and conflict and division, whether that shows up as a world war. Both world wars started under Saturn-Pluto alignments, or epidemics, pandemics, whether it's the AIDS epidemic in the early 1980s or the bubonic plague in the 14th century, or what we're experiencing today, issues of survival. So there's also something very deep that gets forged within us when we move through Saturn-Pluto periods, because we have to face these difficulties and these challenges, and it invites us, maybe sometimes with a forceful hand, to look within, to really confront and face the shadow within ourselves. And then out of that, we have the opportunity to forge the structures of a new way of being in the world. And I feel like we are at that kind of pivotal moment right now, where we do have that possibility to forge a new world structure. I'm just going to very briefly touch on the archetype of Jupiter before handing this over to James. Jupiter is the archetype of growth and expansion. It amplifies and magnifies whatever it's in relationship to. It makes royal what it touches, crowning queen or king, all that it is in relationship to. It brings blessings and abundance and joy, joviality. That's where we get our term jovial from Jove, from the name of Jupiter. And if Jupiter has a shadow side, it's when it becomes too much, too big, too inflated or arrogant. And so this year, 2020, Jupiter joined that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and it took everything Saturn-Pluto was bringing forward and made it bigger. It took a virus and created a pandemic. It globalized this struggle for survival, and even crowned it, the corona crown virus. And so Jupiter's symbolic way of crowning or making royal what it touches came through even in that name. So I will leave it there and pass it over to James.
Thank you, Becca. Beautiful invocation. Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto. So I'm going to be talking about Saturn and Pluto for a few minutes here, because that's a pretty important combination right now, because not only do we have a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the sky currently since 2018, we also have the United States, at least as a country, was born with it's Pluto, when it was born, was at 27 degrees of Capricorn. And so there's a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the sky, and that's also on that natal point of Pluto that the US was born with. And also Pluto has been transiting the sign of Capricorn, which is the sign that has a very similar likening to Saturn. It began transiting Capricorn in like around 2008. It entered into Capricorn, and Capricorn is the sign that's associated with the structures of society, oftentimes associated with things like banking structures, institutions. And as Pluto moved through Capricorn, there was a lot of the Plutonic power, the kind of tossings and turnings of Pluto wants to transform things so that they overcome themselves. Their potential grows out from themselves. And so the banking institutions, there was in the 2011, 2012 Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street, and you know, the 99%, the sense of really having a kind of like a evolutionary moment of wanting to shed, the snake wanting to shed its skin and kind of shed the structures that had gotten too old and crippled, and have a new generation there, new regeneration. And also that is kind of the archetype of Pluto enacting on the Saturnine structures of society, but also there is the structures of our society actually incorporating the Plutonic transformative potential of ourselves through the legalization process of psychedelic therapy, which really took the research really started taking off once Pluto got into Capricorn. The Beckley Foundation put out a graph of research, and it goes from about 2009 and just up to, it's just like a steep increase in research that's moving towards legalization, which is basically to say, taking a process, therapeutic use of psychedelics really allows an individual to go inside and encounter the cauldron of rich regenerative of energies in their psyche for kind of personal death and rebirth, ego death and rebirth that's within the individual, that allows the structures of the ego inside the individual to get kind of regenerated, just like the structures outside us had that sense of wanting to be regenerated. And so, so that is an example of the Plutonic being integrated into the structures of society, in that there's a legalization process, there's a medicalization process that is allowing this Plutonic element of our psyches to get kind of integrated into our societal structure. And I also want to take a moment to look at Pluto as an archetype. Pluto is the archetype that we like to say is very transformative. And when we hear that, we think, great, you know, that's great, it's very transformative, but it's got its own challenges in the sense that whatever it touches in our personal transits or in our world transits, it pulls that other archetype into the underworld, where it has to face its shadow, it has to face its ugly side. And that can be really, that can be challenging if it's a personal transit. You know, something like the therapeutic use of psychedelics allows a container for us to really go into a deep experience of actually facing that which we don't want to face, sides of ourselves, that kind of faces of ourselves that show their underbelly, as it were. And so the Plutonic archetype, when linked with Saturn, kind of shows the dark side of our natural inherent tendency to separate, limit, divide, see differences. As an example, in this current Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and the fact that Saturn and Pluto were transiting the United States natal Pluto, there was a real kind of around the election, there was a sense of everybody's separate, you know, everybody's kind of, all the judgments are, you know, everybody else is the bad guy. There's a sense of kind of separating us off, you know, this side, that side, particularly in the US. Again, that was on the US's Pluto, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction on the natal point of the US's Pluto. And the archetypes have an ability to drop like ink into water so that they permeate everywhere. So it seems like on a national level, there's a sense of that Saturnian division empowered by Pluto. On a statewide level, there is. On a level of community groups, suddenly they are fractious, you know. Then on a level of families, suddenly families are divided. Then on a level of the individual, suddenly the individual feels divided within themselves. It's on all levels. And so the Pluto archetype really does best when it's allowed to fully transform something, when it's allowed to go all the way. That's why in Grof's work with the perinatal matrices, when somebody surrenders to the holotropic state, psychedelic healing, whatever it may be, they can allow a full transformation to happen. And that's when Pluto is most satisfied. And in terms of the US's Pluto return, that division, that sense of division coming up in the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that we have in the US Pluto return, it can allow us to actually transform the structures within us and actually have the full kind of collapse of the structures within us, so that there's a sense of a new way of relating to each other, which I think is important as a nation. I'm beginning to run out of time, so I'm gonna pass. I'm actually gonna paste something here about a continuation on the exploration of psychedelics here in the chat. And I am going to pass it on to Erica.
All right, thank you, James. I love how you're bringing the psychedelic resurgence into Saturn Pluto. And I hope we'll have some talk about that. But I myself am kind of rocking the dystopian vision, I'll admit. And it's just one perspective, right? I think there's a way that astrology can help us to prophesy. But the funny thing about prophecy is that it doesn't necessarily have to come true. Good prophecy is actually just being able to kind of assess what's happening. And if we keep going in this direction, the prophecy says, you know, we might end up where we're headed. So I often remind myself that I try to take in as much as the totality of what is happening that I can in order to make better choices, hopefully. And so, you know, there's lots to be pessimistic about, and yet the cosmos loves surprises. And I'm definitely playing for team reenchantment and regeneration. And because of that, I really try to root into what is sacred and my alliance with life on Earth and in the stars, and let that help me to take a good look at the realities of, you know, the difficulties that we're all facing individually and collectively. And I think what's most on my heart in this present moment is really how to inhabit Saturn's superpower of being with what is. It seems to require a really open heart, sometimes a broken open heart. And I think that alchemical transformation of an open heart, being with what is it's necessary in order to generate kind of a shared reality with others. And that's a basic human need. It's not like this nice thing to have for psychological sanity. There needs to be shared reality. And the intense polarization that's happening, and I'm sitting in the United States, it can generate many different realities, many different futures, this kind of polarization, depending on what dominance holds sway. And, you know, 2020 astrologically has really haunted me since 2013. Just sort of my archetypal astrological studies had completed in 2012. And so I had sort of a collective level view with astrology, and that this year just really was reaching out to me. And the kindest pronunciation that I could make of 2020 was a return of the rule of the natural world. Saturn Pluto is often, we can call it the natural world. Saturn can bring a closeness to Pluto as that wild force of nature, and Pluto as encompassing the natural world. And Jupiter, the ruler, you know, who is going to be in accord or be able to create the greater whole, WHOLE, that's necessary to move forward in a time that is fracturing. And it's like learning that the human being isn't in charge at all, that maybe humans are a part of life. And so I see a little bit of that in the COVID pandemic. But what I actually thought might happen under Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto was a development in antimicrobial resistant bacteria. Because in 2015, I learned that the entire genome of bacteria, it's literally the oldest life form on the planet, is mutating in response to, you know, modernity's attempt to exterminate it. And I think that, you know, antibiotics etymologically means against life. And I think there's that's something that I'm really tracking, even within this present moment. And it's interesting, of course, here's the surprise. Well, yes, disease might have been a part of what Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto was bringing, but it was a virus, a novel virus. I think that, you know, as well, whenever I look at the current moment, I find it very helpful to see what we're kind of riding in on, because all these different archetypal waveforms are all interconnected. It's not like flipping switches on and off. We'll be dealing with the after effects of coronavirus for quite some time, and in unexpected ways. And our response to what we're seeing, all the deep inequities within various societies, whether that's on a national level or larger level. There are many different responses that could possibly happen. So whenever you know, even before that phrase fake news became popularized, there was already this widespread disintegration of belief in many news sources, and a kind of polarization around different news sources that I would kind of correlate to Saturn-Neptune square of 2014 through 2017, kind of together with Uranus square Pluto, that much longer cycle that's just now wrapping up here in 2020, that came in with Pluto's entry into Capricorn in 2008. And Saturn has this sort of cutting off effect with Neptune at times, like the cutting off of illusion, where Neptune is our beliefs, or that can also be untrue or profoundly true. And you know, that melting away of illusions and kind of a revelation of what was being pushed away or hidden seems to me, from that time period, sort of culminating in a moment of just severe disorientation. The chaos that's emerging from it, because it's not enough to just not believe mainstream news. It's not enough to just like say, well, the usual authority figures are no longer important or are lying to us. It's, you know, an absence of a new official narrative is where we're seeing the chaos of Uranus really already making itself very, very much known. I'm so in the Saturn-Uranus vibe already. And it's been coming in already with including Pluto, but I really am curious to see where this powerful trope of paranoia, which is Saturn-Pluto, will continue to go, where it will head as we move into Saturn square Uranus. This sort of breakdown of trust in the social institution of the news media. That's very Saturn-Pluto, because, you know, it's like this idea of walls, Saturn's walls closing in on you. And what is that closing in? What is closing in on us? It's a very well-documented expression of that complex. But whenever I look at this layer of Saturn-Pluto kind of flowing into the Saturn-Uranus that's coming in, and the various technological advances in media and how people obtain information, like this has just really outstripped any sense of media literacy. like how to vet information. And I'd say that even traditional media literacy with traditional sources was pretty lacking anyway. And we're in this brave new world that I kind of see a collision coming on strong through Saturn square Uranus, that we're in through the end of 2023. And maybe Ren, you and I, we can argue about size of orbs, because I'm taking Saturn Uranus out all the way to January 2024, 10 degrees. But this, the social institutions of Saturn kind of contending with the unintended consequences of placing profit motive over and above the public good and technological advancement. It's just no secret that in Silicon Valley, tech development has way outstripped ethical reflection and consideration. So that's my unicorns and rainbows contribution to our conversation. And I will pass, I believe, to Ren. The talking stick is yours, my friend.
Thank you, Erica. I'm going to have to watch Westworld to cheer up. Oh, just kidding. Thank you, James and Becca as well. And before I forget, Becca, James and I have actually been talking for about 1.5 years about some possible online conferences, and we may be, co-hosting an online day-long conference sometime this year. Thinking about it, we would be able to invite many more members of the archetypal astrology community. So many of you in the audience, we look forward to your participation too. So I'm going to do my nerd imitation and show you a slideshow. This is so fun for me. I'm just going to make sure that I'm on the right view. Okay, it's a couple steps to get there. There, can you see that, Kyle and Becca? Yeah, you can see that?
Looks good.
Okay, Rosetta Stone of the Numinous. So through many conversations between Rick Tarnas and Stan Groff in the early to mid 70s, they eventually came to the understanding that archetypal astrology could function as a Rosetta Stone of the processes of the psyche, both in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy experiences, and because everything in human culture is an emanation of the psyche, also in the world of culture. These are the transits that we're talking about today, this triple conjunction of Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn. Many of you are aware that Jupiter, Saturn will conjoin in the very beginning of Aquarius on the winter solstice. That's quite interesting. Jupiter and Saturn will also be, of course, in square with Uranus, Jupiter for most of next year, and Saturn for several years. And Erica, no need to argue, I'm a round egger as well. So that's a reference from Gulliver's Travels. And then for since August, Mars has also been in square with this Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn, just grinding in its message, to use a term from Rick, really enhancing the sense of bitterness, acrimony, harsh confrontation, the sort of grinding wheels of power and sort of conflict. And that'll be nice when that's over, but it certainly has made this election season very interesting. Now, Stan Groff conducted over 3,000 LSD sessions, and out of that data, he extrapolated what he calls an expanded cartography of the human psyche. He understood that the psyche consists of 3 broad domains: the biographical, from infancy to the present; the perinatal, which is about the human confrontation with death and also memories from birth; and then broad realm of experience, the transpersonal realms. He coined that term, transpersonal. Here's a more extended look at that same map with the biographical realm, the perinatal, and the transpersonal realms. This is quite a remarkable schema. Those of you who want to come back to have a look at it, you might find it pretty fascinating. This is in Groff's The Way of the Psychonaut. So at the perinatal layer, Groff found that experiences tend to emerge in 4 somewhat distinct clusters of experience. The first one is based on the intrauterine situation. In an ideal situation, this would be overlaid with images of heaven and paradise. No boundaries. The ego, the separate ego, has not yet been formed. There's a sense of unity with the mother's body biologically and spiritually and with the entire cosmos. The second perinatal matrix is based on the beginning of the contractions with the uterus, the cervix still closed and sort of no exit, compression and constriction. The third perinatal matrix, or BPM, basic perinatal matrix, is based on the long, slow propulsion down the birth canal with the cervix now open. And then BPM4 is based on the crowning and explosive liberation as the infant exits the life-threatening birth canal and becomes an autonomous biological organism. Rick was able to make the correlation between these 4 perinatal matrices with the long observed meaning of the planets Neptune, Saturn, Pluto, and Uranus. And for my 3 presentations today, I'm going to look at Saturn, then Pluto, then Uranus. So this is an hour-and-a-half talk squeezed into 21 minutes. So BPM2, the cervix is still closed. There's a sense of compression and contraction, but no exit. Feelings of constriction, hopelessness, helplessness, very powerful root of clinical depression, lack of meaning or a meaningful connection with the universe. This can often be depicted at the onset as being engulfed in a whirlpool descent into the maelstrom. This is from an LSD session. The artist H.R. Giger was born with Pluto square Mars Saturn, very similar to the world transits right now. And many of you could relate to the feelings in this painting. The perinatal themes of intense compression and suffering. Another Giger. And then my colleague Olena Provencher in San Francisco drew this really interesting drawing of Jean-Paul Sartre in the no exit stage of birth. We know that Sartre had a poorly managed and unresolved mescaline session during his Saturn return. So transiting Saturn was conjunct his natal Moon-Saturn conjunction. And he ended with feelings of depression, hopelessness, a sense of guilt, the absurdity of life. And this became a very powerful influence on his entire life philosophy from that point on, and the development of existentialism in the 20th century. Now, I want to talk about perinatal themes engaged by the COVID-19 pandemic. Saturn BPM2, so feelings of fear, helplessness and victimization, sense of compression, feeling stuck in a holding pattern, isolation and enforced boundaries, seeing the other as dangerous or hostile. COVID restrictions remind many people of this state of constriction during labor and exacerbate their feelings of depression. And many people are resistant to these, not unreasonable restrictions in order to protect our wise elders and seniors and people with pre-existing conditions, because it reminds them of this much more fundamental threat. In conspiracy theories that are floated around now, feelings of oppression by those in authority, vaccines as a form of control or domination, a vast conspiracy to steal our autonomy and freedom. And I believe that people are projecting onto the medical experts these kind of perinatal memories of being constricted. Now, perinatal themes engaged by the Trump presidency and election. Now, this is a pretty wild and rich, fertile area. So everyone is feeling tremendous anxiety, fear of engagement, fear of loss of freedom. Liberal people are afraid of sort of a Trump dictatorship, attempts to steal the election and create a kind of a dictatorship. People with right-wing leanings are also afraid of these Saturnian memories, and they've sort of projected on communism and imagine that some kind of communist or socialist agenda will take away their freedom. Now, from a liberal perspective, this an alarming brush with totalitarianism right now. Trump as a self-serving tyrant and manipulator. Pluto intensifying right now the Saturn archetype that Becca was talking about. Also, in a more ongoing way, a threat to abortion rights, forcing people to give birth. I believe that there are perinatal elements in that debate as well. Now, from a conservative perspective, Trump's projection of strength is seen as an admirable virtue, a necessary hardening of defensive boundaries. There's a great fear of change among people on the right wing, fear of loss of freedom in socialism or communism, as I mentioned. This is from a BPM-2 sequence in an LSD session where the uterine contractions are depicted as an attack by a monstrous octopus. And we can see this in the kind of sort of propaganda or political cartoons during this period. This is a fairly recent one where the government is portrayed as this monstrous octopus stealing people's freedom and torturing them and so on. This is a kind of a pro-Trump cartoon. And here's Donald Trump as the man of steel, a term Rick often used. The Pluto Saturn periods often correspond to hardening of boundaries, a sense of armoring and defensiveness. He's impervious to all criticism or all feedback, and they would see this as a positive virtue, people on the far right. And then this is a great cartoon from Angry White Menistan, where you see the intensified boundaries and all the things that they want to keep out. But I believe that these perinatal memories are underlying that fear of change. I'll talk more about that. So on the positive side, during these transits, we can discover a deep capacity to persevere and endure difficult situations. This is a time of forced introspection, a reset of our basic priorities and life strategy. This is the positive side of Saturn. But many people don't want introspection and they resent it, and it can be experienced as a negative force for them. So I will now turn this over to Kyle.
All right, I've also got a slideshow. Let's see, share screen, keynote. You can see that? Cool. Okay, so this is an overview slide trying to show a couple different dimensions. Let's start at the bottom. Oh, I can't see my mouse. Okay, so this bottom timeline where it says archetypal patterning and qualitative tendency, I'm using a 10-degree orb, and you can see there's a Saturn-Pluto layer. There's contraction and deprivation, crisis involving life and death, confrontation, authoritarian response. That's all been laid down and active since 2019 and even before. And then we see Jupiter-Pluto come into the conjunction in 2020 with extreme amplification and titanic intensity. And so those are kind of like the qualities. And then in the middle graph, you get the transiting alignments, and this gives you the quantitative amplitude. This is a 10-degree orb, so you'll see 0 degrees is at the top, and that's basically degree difference. So that means they're exactly conjunct, and then 10-degree at the bottom. And so you kind of see Saturn conjunct Pluto come in, and then it peaks at the very beginning of 2020. And then Jupiter comes in, and there's 3 peaks through the year. And then if we look at the very top graph, we've got significant events and trends that are pandemic related. And so the first COVID case happened in November in Wuhan, and then it started breaking out. And I think maybe in January, Wuhan got put in quarantine. And those are labeled as gray to signify the correlation with the Saturn-Pluto. And then around, I think April, I think it's March sometime, the WHO declares the global pandemic. So at that point, it had jumped out, it hit Italy, and it started kind of taking a foothold in multiple different countries. And then as Jupiter comes in, we just see this just spiraling out of control. We'll go into that more. So let's see. I want to focus on Jupiter, Pluto, and extreme amplification across a couple different dimensions. So there's the biological and the epidemiological dimension. Underlying all this is the Saturn-Pluto hardship. But with the Jupiter, you get this intensified evolutionary competition among species, the virus versus human. You get this sense of ecological niche domination and apex predation. So it's this localized respiratory viral epidemics in multiple countries, moves into a global pandemic. You get exponential growth dynamics and synthesis of greater wholes. That's kind of all at the level of biology. And then at the level of culture and politics, you get this Jupiter-Pluto constellates as plutocracy, aristocracy, the power elite, the high culture elite, the leadership class, the investor class, the owners. And then you get the intersection of wealth and power with its timeless and concentrated tendency towards corruption. And then you get sort of a constant temptation to abuse power. And we see this in the US with a downplaying of the severity of threats for politically convenient optics, what I would consider criminal negligence. And then finally, there's the personal and psychological dimension. There's the inflation and power trips, the delusions of superiority. And I wrote in quotes, "This won't happen to me." There's the overconfidence in self and the underestimating of external dangers. So the media is just fear-mongering. It's not that big of a deal. And then there's this other shadow element of misplaced trust in the benevolence and generosity of life. So family gatherings and business as usual remain my priority. This is generally like a really positive trait, except when there is an incredible sort of life and death confrontation as the Saturn-Pluto complex comes in, to be sort of stuck on the Jupiterian pole of not having any defenses or precautionary measures. That becomes a problem. Okay, so I wanted to lay all that out. Now let's look at a couple COVID metrics. There's daily new cases, there's currently hospitalized, and there's daily new deaths. And the daily new cases and the daily new deaths, those are daily metrics. They start at 0 every day, and they'll show second order effects of acceleration or deceleration of spread velocity day to day. So 1,000 cases today, 1,000 cases tomorrow, 1,000 cases the day after is a flat line. It's an even. And then if you get 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, that's a slope. So that's the acceleration. And it's just the sort of first cloud front, flame front of this spread. And this is what we are able to most affect with our collective behavioral adaptations with social distancing and mask wearing and whatnot. And so the Jupiter-Pluto shadows in terms of affecting inflation and underestimating dangers, like this is where there's a most impact there. And then currently hospitalized is a cumulative metric. It shows the ongoing state and flux. It's a metric with memory, whereas the daily new cases is not. It starts over every day. It shows you the middle ground of the pandemic phenomena. People that are hospitalized, either they recover and they're out, or they die and they're out. And then it shows something like degree of collective severity. And then daily new deaths, again, it begins at 0 every day, and it shows second order effects. And it kind of gives you a glimpse into the transpersonal dimension of the phenomenon. It's basically how many souls are leaving Earth every day and how that fluctuates. And this is where we have the least amount of personal control. This is kind of Saturn and Pluto coming in. Okay, so here's a zoom in on daily new cases worldwide with the Jupiter conjunct Pluto. So I can't see my mouse, but at the first applying, the first peak around April, you see a spike in slope. And then as it separates, you see a flattening of slope. And then as applying again in June, July, and August, you see another acceleration in spread. And then as it separates, you see a flattening in August, September, and October. And then as they come back for this last applying towards the peak, you see a pretty massive spike. And it seems to be kind of flattening out, but it's too early to say what's happening now. So that's worldwide. That's all the countries cumulatively every single day. So we're at like 600,000 cases every single day, day after day. Okay, zooming in. Here's just the US, and I sort of, the US has the most striking correlation with the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. I think there's this element of, there's just something in the culture. The cultural state has the highest affinity with these Jupiter-Pluto inflationary shadow elements. And so you see like a really solid correlation in terms of daily new cases. And then we're looking at a pretty huge spike. Okay. Currently hospitalized with COVID. Now this is the cumulative. This shows you everyone that's in the hospitals at any given point in time. And so you kind of see the fluctuations. So you see it in second order effects of daily new cases, but then you also see this first order effect, just people in the hospitals. And this is kind of more of just a exponentially growing trend. And then we move to daily new deaths. There's some correlation, it's a little spottier. You see in April, there's a huge spike and then it drops. And then in the summer, around July, there's sort of a lag there. It doesn't jump until August, and it drops down, and then there's another spike. And then finally, here's the worldwide deaths. It spikes. There's not a whole lot of correlation in the middle, but then at the very end in November, there's another spike. So that is the US and the world, and then I'll, in the next round, I'll go over various countries. So with that, I will stop the share and pass it on to Amber.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. Yeah, those correlations are just absolutely fascinating. I also have a slideshow, so let me share my screen. I have to talk it through and open this up here. Okay, so I'm going to be kind of shifting gears in my presentation a bit. So what I really want to demonstrate is a more personal rendition of working with these archetypal energies. So I'm going to start out a little conceptually and then move into more of a storytelling mode for this first session. So I'm calling this Interwoven Realms, Engaging Archetypes Through Personal Practice. Okay, so I put this together. I realized that some of the elements of it are a little bit hard to see. And I decided to do that intentionally because for me, in working with the different layers of reality, the different layers of my experience, whether I'm working as my personal process or whether I'm working with the client, they're often really subtle. It's really kind of hard to see. So I thought, well, okay, I'll just put that in the image. So this is a very oversimplified version of reality. I wanted to create something that would be accessible. So I don't see this as a perfect model, but I thought it would be helpful to kind of bring it here. So on this outer edge here is the archetypal. And so that would be all of the layers of like what Becca was bringing in and invoking and you know, like the archetypal characters, the king and the queen. Another archetype, which I'll be talking more about, would be like death, birth. And then, so moving in from the archetypal, even though I see the transpersonal and the archetypal really interwoven into every layer, I wanted to separate it out just a little bit, just to kind of think about it like this. So moving inwardly, we're moving closer to the personal awareness realm, but we have this transpersonal realm here. And as it's increasingly personal moving in, there's a little bit of overlap. And it's this intermediary realm that I find particularly fascinating. For me, this would be like the dream realm. It would also be art. It would be archetypal astrology. But, you know, so I wanted to show that there's kind of like this limited personal awareness aspect, which you know, a lot of different psychological approaches can talk about that in a million different ways. I wanted to keep it really like surface level. So this is just, you know, I'm not really trying to get into the different layers of the personal human psyche, but just the personal awareness. And then I have these arrows. I wanted to kind of represent the polarity with the black and the white, and the energies moving in both directions. So for me, I really experienced life and reality as participatory, and I wanted to kind of indicate that with this back and forth movement between the archetypal realm and the personal, transpersonal, all these different layers. So just to kind of demonstrate a little bit more of what I'm saying, this particular chart, the particulars don't matter. So again, I made it kind of, you know, transparent. But basically, this is like how I would view, you know, a natal chart is a reflection of this intermediary realm right here. So when we look at a chart, the archetypal is represented, you know, in these symbols here, and we attribute certain meaning to that, and then we translate that in our understanding through contemplating a chart and through living our lives. So I wanted to just kind of touch on that. So that's just basically the framework that I'm coming from, but I really want to shift gears now and really take a more like personal tone. So I decided that I'm going to share a dream that I had this year, and I'm going to try to demonstrate how the themes that were in the dream connect into these different realms. So I'm calling this a Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto personal, transpersonal dream song, because the dream actually brought in a song also, and I'm going to present on some of the symbolism within the song and a performance in my third round. So at this time when I had this dream, I was actually having difficulty mediating the archetype of death. I was feeling anxious. Oh, and by the way, this I compiled images from the dream to kind of give you the felt sense of the energy of the dream. So, you know, and when I work dreams, so in my work with people and in my personal practice, I primarily work combining dream work and astrology. And for me, doing dream work, it's very important to tune into the individual's personal symbol system rather than referring to something outside of the person. Although every now and then it can be helpful to bring that in as an additional layer to consider. It's usually more, much more accessible to work with the material if the person is defining the elements in the dreams themselves. Again, it's kind of that intermediary, and it's getting filtered through that personal level, which I just find fascinating. But okay, so I was struggling, and then I'm just going to read the dream as I wrote it at the time. So I'm in my maternal grandparents' neighborhood. It's nighttime, and it has a very eerie feeling. It feels like the between times when the veil is thin. The tone is kind of spooky, and there is a low-lying fog over the land. My grandmother is showing me around her old neighborhood. The scene is very ghostly. People are strewn all over the sidewalks and lawns. They are all very sick or dying. I walk through with my grandmother, and I feel like she's showing me around and maybe also protecting me. I'm unsure of how to conduct myself, and I'm unsure why I am here. We pass by a man who is on his hands and knees on the sidewalk. He's clearly struggling to breathe. I can see that his eyes are wide and bulging, and his mouth is open and gasping, but he can't breathe. I feel entirely unsure what to do. Should I try to help him? Would it interfere, or would it cause more suffering somehow? Unsure, I gaze at his darkening lips and I take a step back. I scan the nightmarish death camp scene and I startle awake at 4 a.m. So I felt afraid when I woke up, and I had an odd chest congestion and pain, a physical manifestation of this fear. I calmed myself down and tried returning to sleep. And as I finally started drifting off, I began to hear a song playing in my mind. And it was a song that I wasn't that familiar with, but familiar enough that I was able to later track it down. So in my next round, I will go over a little more of the particulars of the themes that came out from the dream work that I did, and then move into the song and the message that I got from that. But for now, I'll be passing it on to Becca.
Thank you so much for that, Amber, and all of you in the panel. So moving into this second round, I wanted to bring in another planetary archetype, another presence that's been shaping this year. And that is looking at the role of Mars in these configurations. So we started off with the first layer of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that's been here from the beginning of 2018. It will go through the end of 2021. And then nested within that is Jupiter conjoining both Saturn and Pluto. We saw those three exact conjunctions of Jupiter, Pluto in the beautiful graphs that Kyle shared. The exact conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn is coming up on the 21st. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the last round. But there's been this other presence throughout this year too, and that has been Mars. And Mars is a faster moving planet than these outer planets we've been discussing. Mars has a 2-year orbit rather than a 12-year orbit like Jupiter, a 29.5-year orbit like Saturn, or a 246-year orbit like Pluto. So Mars is moving at a fast pace. And the archetype of Mars is it ignites what it touches. It's fire and energy and action. It's the will to do. It leaps ahead. The glyph of Mars, it's this arrow kind of pointing forward in this assertive manner. And so Mars is the warrior. It's the athlete. It's that fire in our blood, the energetic pulse and vitality that moves through us and that can bring forth anger and aggression. And so what is the role that Mars has played this year? Well, as you saw in the chart that Ren showed, we have this triple conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. And then beginning in March, Mars joined that. So we had a quadruple conjunction, 4 planets all stacked up next to each other in the sky: Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto. And Mars moved through that stellium, that alignment of planets, in March and April. And looking ahead at this time period years ago, when I saw that alignment, I thought, is that when World War III is going to start? Like what is going to ignite during this time? And what ignited was the rapid spread of the coronavirus around the world. And so, Jupiter globalized it, it magnified it, it amplified the situation. But Mars is really what gave that sense of speed to the unfolding situation. So Mars comes into the alignment with Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, and suddenly we're seeing not just week by week, but like day by day, the situation is changing very rapidly. Mars is pushing that ahead, lighting the whole situation on fire. And even the symptoms, there's a very fiery quality to the symptoms of COVID, and that sense of like fever and burning. Those are qualities of Mars. And so we saw that in the first 2 months of the spread of the pandemic and the lockdowns coming in around the world in this very rapid way in March and April. And then Mars moved away from that alignment, and over the course of the summer made a number of different complex aspects to different planets. And we saw all kinds of ignition over the summer. We saw the igniting of protests and the expression of righteous anger against police brutality and racial discrimination. So over the course of the summer, as cities are literally lighting on fire, we're able to perceive how Mars was lighting up all of these different alignments. But then the story starts to change again as we come to the end of the summer and the beginning of the autumn. And Mars has moved at this point from the conjunction with Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, so where it's next to those planets, to a 90-degree square. So the nature of the square, that 90-degree angle, is one that's filled with tension and the unexpected. And it can often feel kind of difficult to resolve those energies. And so beginning in August, we saw Mars sweep in this square to Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto. And for example, the day that Mars was exactly in alignment with Jupiter and very close to Pluto, that was when the explosion in Beirut happened, this massive, destructive, violent explosion. And so Mars swept across those three planets, and then on September 9th, stationed retrograde, meaning from our perspective on the Earth, it looked as though Mars started to move backwards across the sky. And right at the time in August that Mars was lighting up Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, that's when the whole west coast of the US caught fire, literally. And so the fires started burning very intensely beginning the middle of August. And then by September 9th, the day that Mars stationed retrograde, that was the day that all of these photographs started coming out of the West Coast, particularly from the San Francisco Bay Area, of the sky being not just smoke-filled and red, but the color of Mars itself. And there were all these images, people piecing together photographs of, a still from Blade Runner 2049, a still from Mad Max Fury Road, an image of the surface of the planet Mars itself, and then an image of the San Francisco skyline labeled September 9th, 2020. And they're all the same shade of kind of vermilion, orange, red, which is Mars's color. And so this very kind of literal and yet still symbolic expression of Mars, when Mars dug its heels in and went retrograde, sweeping back across Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto throughout the fall, and all the ways that we could see that coming through, and all the tensions around the election, for example, and this feeling of like the threat of violence right below the surface, barely being held back. And then on November 13th, Mars turned direct again, and it's making its way forward once more to make its final pass, its final sweep over Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto. And the day that it turned direct, the 13th, we're just 10 days past the US election, the news switches. Now we're back to talking about the pandemic. Now we're seeing the lockdowns coming in again. And there's this mirroring between what happened in March and what's happening since the middle of November. So Mars has been this key player in triggering or igniting the larger archetypal dynamics of the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium. And because now Mars doesn't go retrograde all that often, it's over 2 years every time it turns retrograde. And so when that happens, there's a sense of significance. In astrology, the more rare an occurrence is, the more significance, the more weight it carries. And with Mars turning retrograde this fall, and having this mirroring of the transits between the whole late summer, autumn, early winter, and what happened in March and April of this year, it almost feels as though Mars has taken on the status of an outer planet and has defined the picture much in the same way that Jupiter has. And so it's really carrying a significance and defining 2020 in this extraordinary way. And we will now be living through in these next few weeks, Mars making that final passage in alignment to the stellium. And it's an opportunity for us to look at the ways that we responded with all the previous passes through that alignment, and asking ourselves, how do we want to show up this time? How do we want to take action? Be a warrior on behalf of what matters. How do we want to use the energies of Mars in a way that feels righteous and oriented toward justice? So I will leave it there, and now we'll hand it over to James again. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Becca. That was great. So yes, so Mars, we're bringing Mars in, so the energy is getting heated up, and it's there with Jupiter. So we're feeling we're getting a little bit of positive uplift here. And I'm going to return briefly to talk about the United States Pluto return. And so every about 248 years, Pluto makes one round around the zodiac. So if you were a human being and you lived that long, you would have your Pluto return, but nobody does. So nations have the possibility of living that long and experiencing their Pluto return, meaning Pluto comes back around to where it was when that nation was born. In our current shape of the world and our current trend of nation state structure, we don't have a ton of examples of nations that have survived that long. We'd have to look back to, if we look back at Rome or we look at the Chinese dynasties, there's that Rome lived beyond that. The Roman Republic lived beyond that Pluto return. Also, several of the dynasties in China, a few in Egypt. So it's not to say that the Pluto return is as titanic as the archetype of Pluto is. It's not to say that the Pluto return by any means signals something dire for a nation. On the other hand, I personally feel that it can be very transformative in a positive sense, in the sense that Pluto as an archetype is associated with, like in terms of the biology of the human body, there's a kind of an ugly process, but one that's helpful nonetheless of getting boils when there's like a kind of a contaminant that gets under the skin. The body has a way of creating a boil that kind of gets it out. And Pluto's associated with this quality of being able to get something up and out. And we kind of, in order to get it out, we usually have to face the ugliness of the process of getting it out. Yeah, it's kind of like sometimes in psychedelic circles, you hear people say that, if you have a bad emotion or trauma that is lodged in your psyche, you have to, just like you had to taste it going in, you got to taste it going out. And so the Pluto return for the United States could be associated with kind of some aspects of our society getting burped up and out. There's a lot of possible examples of that that have been happening. We were talking about police brutality and policing structures and all types. It's a little hard to discern between Pluto's transit through Capricorn and the kind of structures of the entire world getting transformed and just the United States. And also that Pluto return hasn't gone exact yet, so it's yet to be seen. A positive note is that in, I think, 2023, 2024, when the Pluto return is exact, Neptune and Uranus will be in what's called harmonious angles to that Pluto return. In other words, in harmonious angles to the natal position of Pluto for the United States. That's something kind of supportive energy of Uranus, revolution and freedom, supportive energy of Neptune, the kind of dissolving energies, spiritualizing energies, an aspect of the United States, Pluto, natal Pluto position. And then, by the way, we have been talking a lot about Pluto, Saturn, Pluto, and this difficult year that we've been having. And looking into the future, there is a point where Pluto is in a trine to Uranus and a sextile to Neptune, and they're all three of them are in harmonious angles for almost 10 years, depending on what orb you're using, starting around 2023, going all the way close to 2033. So at that time, we may anticipate a lot of what came up during this decade when Pluto and Uranus were square, having an ease of being able to roll out during that time. Technological, Uranus is associated with the technological, Pluto's driven that. So, you know, there's a lot of association with space flight and things like that with Pluto Uranus. There's also the Uranus releasing the plutonic quality of transformation. We talked about psychedelic therapy. There may be a kind of an ease of segueing of psychedelic therapy into the structures of our society, which would be nice because in the United States, at least, Pluto is in the sign of Capricorn in its natal chart. So to have the plutonic transformative powers within the individual psyche integrated into the structures of the society would be a good kind of representation of that position of Pluto and Capricorn in the United States natal chart. One other thing that I want to say before I hand it over is just that the Saturn-Pluto combination, or we could say the combination of Pluto and Capricorn, both of them, they have a tendency to, as we pointed out already, Pluto has a tendency to drive the Saturnian sense of difference, division, limitation, and kind of the threat of mortality. It tends to drive it, intensify it, so that the psyche is in a hyper-aware sense of threat. And so that can also be a threat of what is internal in our mind, of our own, you know, unconscious impulses that are threatening to destabilize our structures. And that can get projected out. So it's like threat everywhere, division everywhere. But if one of the kind of true plutonic death, rebirth, or alchemical fires, transformative potentials of Pluto is in seeing that, you know, outside is division, outside is the sense of separation. Everybody's projecting onto everybody else their negativity. And I'm seeing that, I'm also doing that. There's actually a sense of commonality there. There's a sense that within all of our kind of mutual division, there's actually a sense like we're all in the same state. We are all experiencing the same state together. And that can kind of be a part of the other side of the concluding energy of a Saturn-Pluto cycle, Pluto transforming the structure to see that, oh, my internal structures, the external structures, my internal structures is similar. You know, like what is happening externally, what's happening internally. You know, it can, the old structures, old divisions of internal, external can get burnt down and allow for a new possibility, potential in terms of what is inner, what is outer, kind of a little bit more of a space for the transpersonal awareness of reality. So I'm going to begin to pass it on here and to others so that we can talk about other archetypal combinations, maybe look to the future a bit. When we come back around, maybe I'll get a chance to talk a little bit about Saturn Uranus. We can move forward from this Saturn Pluto, maybe. All right, I'm passing it on to Erica, I believe.
You are correct. Thank you, James. You know, I'm gonna stick with Saturn Pluto for a bit longer, but I'm gonna bring in Saturn Uranus. All right, y'all. I got that Saturn Uranus square. That transit's been lighting me up, and I can tell you, holding the tension of the opposites it's a beautiful practice. We'll get to that in a minute. So picking back up on or maybe continuing with the plutonic transformation or deformation of consensus reality of Saturn, and that deep psychological need that James was also talking about. The social creature of the human really needs this kind of shared reality. You know, I'm really a fan of using more of a Jupiterian style to make greater wholes, WHOLES, when it comes to transforming shared realities. Certainly there is much which needs healing, but you know, that doesn't seem to be the intention of alternate reality makers that I see out there. I'm going to have to pick on QAnon. It's just one of the strangest things I've ever witnessed in my life. And other purveyors of like alternate realities that seem to be kind of preying upon the real and imagined fears of people. And that's the Saturn Pluto, right? It's the suspicion that something's not quite right here, which is true, actually. You know, we are in the middle of the Earth's 6th mass extinction event, which is considered to be caused by human activity. And the last time that happened on this Earth was 65 million years ago. So we're like literally in the midst of the termination of a geological epoch known as the Holocene, the last 11,700 years. So like this paranoia and the desire to kind of peer underneath surface appearances and to some hidden or maybe intentionally obscured reality is I think, quite an honest motive. That desire or the sense, the intuition, something isn't right here. You know, there are really things about our generally accepted reality which aren't quite right. Something about civilizational arrangements that are unhealthy. And so, you know, we've got the credibility of the basic intuition, but like, what do we do with this? And that's, of course, an open question. And I said in my introduction, the wider world is now experiencing an intense polarization that can generate so many different futures. Depends on what dominant stories kind of hold sway. And I think that this polarization could also be understood as a very well disguised desire for truth and reconciliation. And that's a mythic idea. It's a Jungian idea that the mythologist and storyteller Michael Meade talks a lot about this, that when two opposites are constellated very, very powerfully, it's actually an to just, and it's part of an attempt actually to generate a new shared reality. And I just think that one of the difficult difficulties of Saturn Pluto, the way that it generates polarization and the experience of opposites, is an accompanying desire for simplicity and black and white explanations. Saturn Pluto, I think, is a really well describes psychological trauma, which psychological traumas which are unhealed will actually see the world as a simple play of good and evil. There's no capacity for nuance. Everything's just this very easy to figure out who's good and who's bad. So I think that as Saturn Uranus really starts to take center stage in the next few years, I expect we're going to see some of the consequences of that longing for simplicity. The longing for easy villains, the caricatured superheroes, who's going to fix things, as the sense of shared reality continues to fracture and open up new possibilities. But this archetypal complex of Saturn Uranus is just so unpredictable. It has sudden reversals of all kinds. And I think it really highlights the uncertainties that we face on every level and around the globe in recovering from the impact of the pandemic. So the glaring inequalities within and among societies, they're just so visible. And that, as James was talking about, the broken or problematic in social fabrics is just not as hidden. It's been drawn to the surface. But Saturn Pluto, it creates also such a diversity of perspectives on events. Depending on your explanatory story, you can see the lockdowns around the world about coronavirus as some kind of authoritarian evil, or the same thing as actually an attempt to care for each other. I think that's just a trip. That's just like how amazing that these two absolutely contradictory stories can coexist around the exact same phenomenon. How people can manage to see the exact same events and piece them together in a completely different pattern. So that Saturn-Uranus cycle is really going to pick up the tension of the opposites in a profound way. I think Saturn-Uranus really embodies the opposites, that perception that humans have. Saturn as old, Uranus as new, in the most simplistic sense. But it's a very dynamic and sometimes kind of harsh interplay of polarity. But I think it's going to bring some greater movement to what may feel more like that entrenched, dug in polarization that has come with Saturn Pluto, that actual, an urge for truth and reconciliation. But how we hold it, that's everything. And I think something that each of us can reflect on how to influence how that is held, whether in our being or in our participation in our, realms in our communities and societies. But truly, you know, I think at its very best, Uranus and Saturn together can represent a bridge. The future is Uranus, the past is Saturn, but it's usually, it takes this, you know, big struggle around a belief of I have to choose one or the other. So staying with that tension, instead of trying to prematurely choose one or the other, can really help bring forth something entirely new. And Jungian psychology, or Carl Jung referred to this as the tertium non datur, the third thing that's not given, that can only come out of being with this, you know, irreconcilable tension and opposition. So, you know, I'll have to wrap up here, but I would say that an overarching quality of our times is to cultivate the capacity to not know and to be in a really receptive state. Mythically, you know, I think of this as like the dark goddess archetype on the rise, who's all nourishing but regenerative, plutonic, like burning away delusions, which may be really near and dear to our identities. But that process, the dark goddess, brings authenticity and greater truth and a continuity of existence. So I will leave off with that beautiful being and pass the baton to Ren.
Wow. Wow, you are also blowing my mind, Erica. A lot of things that you said, I will be also talking about, the beautiful synergy and overlapping. And thanks to everyone for your excellent contributions. So I'm going to share my screen again. Here, is that coming through? Big screen? Yeah, thanks, Becca. Okay. Oh, wait. Looks like I've turned on. There we go. Is it still okay? Yeah. I was seeing my words being typed on the screen. Never saw that before. So the important thing to remember about these perinatal matrices is the core of them really is the archetypal dimension. These elements of heaven and paradise, hellish constriction, purgatorial drive toward the light, and then ecstatic liberation and reunion. The obstetric, in a sense, is a subset within that. So these, we are certainly not, we are not reducing these perinatal matrices to just memories that happened during birth. The archetypal transpersonal component is the more important part of it. So Pluto, confrontations with the shadow side of human nature, intense driving pressures and activation of powerful energies in this dynamic stage of birth labor. The cervix is now open. The frail head of the fetus is jammed into the narrow pelvic opening by very powerful pressures, contractions. A sense of there being a finite amount of suffering, feelings of moving toward light at the end of the tunnel. As opposed to Saturnian suffering, which can feel endless and inescapable. With Pluto, you have a sense that you will eventually get out. This was again the correlation that Rick made with Stan's work. So in this dynamic stage of the death rebirth struggle connected with Pluto, one of the important components is activation of aggression, a sense of titanic fight. And we're certainly seeing that in the culture wars right now. I'll be looking at that more specifically. Activation of Dionysian and sexual energies, which because of the suffocation in labor tend to have a sadomasochistic component. It's interesting that the Marquis de Sade was born with a Venus, Mars, Pluto in T-square and Venus, Saturn, square Mars. Some of the components of what we're experiencing right now. It's also, we need to remember that that was just one of the expressions of these energies. Many people with these same alignments will manifest them in different ways or more responsible ways. People can confront the problem of evil and the relationship between good and evil. And this is certainly, a lot of this is being projected between different human groups right now in the culture wars. These sequences deepen into confrontations with negative archetypal energies or wrathful deities, as the Buddhists call them. Groff calls this the demonic. Again, Giger was born with Pluto square Mars Saturn, an uncanny capacity to depict the nightmarish world of the perinatal matrices. Another theme that emerges is the scatological. In sessions, people can experience tremendous nausea. Projectile vomiting is a frequent occurrence. There's a finite amount of this in the psyche, Groff was able to prove. And so it's very beneficial in deep self-exploration to allow this nausea to surface. And then finally, pyrocatharsis, a sense of passing through purifying fire that can purify everything that is rotten and corrupt in our souls and prepare our souls for rebirth. This is from an ayahuasca session with transiting Pluto conjunct her natal sun. 3 great videos that depict all of the elements of BPM3, or many of them, are Madonna's spectacular Like a Prayer from 89. She had transiting Pluto lighting up her Uranus sun and opposition her natal Mars. Very powerful artistic piece. That same year, Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire, which I believe was the #1 song in 1989. He had very similar transits of Pluto opposition his Sun Mars and square his natal Pluto. So essentially Pluto, Sun, Mars, same as Madonna. And then Lady Gaga's Bad Romance, one of the most emblematic videos of this recent Uranus-Pluto square. Very popular, and she had transiting Pluto conjunct her natal Mars and square her natal Sun. Sun in Aries square Mars in Capricorn natally, and lit up by transiting Pluto. This video is like a textbook illustration of Groff's BPM3. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend checking it out. And then a great expression of BPM3 in the arts is Picasso's Guernica. Pluto square his natal sun when he drew this paradigmatic expression of the breakdown of structures of the 20th century, the horrors unleashed in the world wars, and this was specifically the Luftwaffe bombing of Guernica. Now, perinatal themes engaged by the COVID-19 pandemic. In March, especially, the sense of apocalyptic danger, intensification of the culture war. So now we're looking at Pluto BPM3 here. There was an interesting scatological element. Some of you may have thought of this, the run on toilet paper in the early days of the lockdown. It was like the shit was hitting the fan and people just thought if they only had toilet paper, they were going to be able to make it through all right. Now, from a liberal and a medical perspective, the dangerous behavior of not wearing masks at large rallies, often referred to as Trump's death cult, inflexible economic considerations, and a willingness to sacrifice the lives of others, such as seniors and those with pre-existing conditions, rather than threaten economic gain. Groff talks a lot about BPM3, a very powerful root of the 2 main human problems facing our species. Aggression and also insatiable greed. And maybe in the next webinar, I can sort of unpack that a little more. So very difficult choices. It's horrible to see people losing their businesses, and it's just a very difficult time. Hard times, as people talked about the Saturn, Uranus, Pluto T-square and the Great Depression of the 29 to 33. The wearing of masks and physical distancing could have greatly mitigated these problems. So unfortunately, the US in particular is getting this in a very difficult magnitude. Someone online wrote this, Carmen sent this to me, my girlfriend. If you're refusing to wear a mask due to concerns that your brain won't get enough oxygen, it's pretty clear that ship has sailed. Now, from conspiracy theories and far-right perspective, enforced mask wearing is a form of domination and acknowledgement of weakness, a reminder of perinatal choking. People have this fear of choking, and this is, for many people, Groff found this is the most important meta trauma in their lives, was the choking, sometimes being brought to the edge of death during the birth process. Anything that reminds us of that choking, we will tend to react against in a very overblown way. So also connected with Pluto here, the determination to press through and not be deterred by the threat of death. This is kind of Trump's approach, is just, let's just power through, and death is death, and death happens, or whatever his expressions are about it. So kind of maybe the ruthless side of Pluto would be how the liberals would see that, liberal people and most educated people. Perinatal themes engaged by the Trump presidency and election. Oh, get ready, put your seatbelts on here. Feelings of apocalyptic danger, activation of aggressive feelings, escalation of the culture wars. And this has been, by all accounts, an intense pressure test of the US constitutional system, a major death rebirth struggle when, everything is on the line. Trump's attempts to circumvent the will of the American people and basically steal the election is really a coup. And if something like that happened, it would be the end of the United States as we know it. From a liberal perspective, Trump's rhetoric giving permission for people to act out their shadow feelings, their racist projections, urges to confine and punish others, lock her up. With Saturn, we tend to identify mainly with victims, or rather with BPM2 experiences. In BPM3, people can, when they're experiencing that in their sessions, they can identify emotionally both with victims and perpetrators. And so there's this kind of activated Pluto now, and this desire to be the punishing force, to turn the tables, instead of just being the victim, but to be the actual doer, the perpetrator, to do it to other people, to be the one that does the confining, the judging, the punishing, separating children from their parents and putting them in cages. From a conservative perspective, fear of too rapid change, permission to express aggressive feelings. Trump has given people permission to let it out, and they don't want that to end. It feels good for people to have a kind of an enemy that they think they can justifiably aim their aggression at, the Mexicans or the liberals or whatever. So some cartoons, love that. Either tweet or nuke, haven't decided yet that moment. Here's Trump as a kind of a baby man, just pounding on Obama with his birther, conspiracy. Now, sadomasochistic themes also connected with BPM3. From a liberal perspective, members of the Republican Party are prostituting themselves for short-term gain. And here's a great cartoon. I just had the worst nightmare. And also the sadistic cruelty and acts of police brutality. I can't breathe. These famous, these paradigmatic crying out of African-American victims of police brutality really connects it with that primal trauma of the birth process. It's like where the collective psyche is in a state of suffocation in this death rebirth period. Now, from a far-right conspiracy perspective, Erica mentioned QAnon. Thanks for bringing that up. They see the Democratic Party as a cabal of Satan-worshiping pedophiles running a global child sex trafficking ring and plotting against President Donald Trump, who is the hero fighting the cabal. Now, it's very plausible that while there are undoubtedly financial and political motivations of the leaders of those conspiracies, many of the followers are influenced by this memory of BPM3, as we saw. Here is a situation in which a helpless young person is assaulted by an overwhelmingly powerful force in an atmosphere of tremendous fear and dark demonic energies. It's something like a witch's Sabbath or a sort of a satanic orgy atmosphere is part of the BPM3 complex that Groff observed in his clients when they were in these therapeutic sessions. And it's very possible that people, because they have that in their psyches, can be manipulated into believing that it's actually happening in the outer world. And this doesn't mean to say that it never happens in the outer world. I think there is probably, you know, ritual satanic abuse at certain times and places in the human social underworld, but certainly not on the scale that these conspiracy theories are alleging. Now, demonic themes. Rick talks about tendencies towards splitting and othering during Saturn-Pluto world transits, projection of one's shadow material onto other people. From a liberal perspective, and you know, most of us in this webinar would probably not see these as projections, but as actual truth. You know, moral failure of many Republican leaders in not condemning the totalitarian behavior of the outgoing president in his attempts to overturn the results of the election. Trump as a self-serving demagogue on a dangerous power trip, attempted coup. This sort of demonic energy would be how progressive people would see his behavior. It's a great cartoon, you know, not really the most admirable savior. You know, here Mary Magdalene's a 10. He's talking about another thing, you know, don't shelter the homeless. From a conservative perspective, these demonic themes manifest as their sense of this battle between good and evil, their sense that the liberal atheist agenda is trying to steal Christmas, Jesus, God, and you can see how hard they will fight to protect against that. People's spirituality is their most important thing in their lives, and to feel that that's under threat, you can understand why, you know, whether it is under threat rightly or wrongly, not to the degree they think, I'm sure, but why they would sort of react against that. Allegations of a vast conspiracy involving Hugo Chavez, FBI, and the Department of Justice. Kamala Harris as a monster and communist. I am your bulwark against Antifa. Trump says this sense of there's evil forces and I, Trump, am the savior, protector. And then again, the issue of abortion, this wedge issue that costs so many elections for the progressive elements, the many hundreds of thousands of fetus aborted each year in the United States. Many people will vote for the Republicans just on this issue alone. Now the scatological themes, and I apologize for going a little over time on this one. I just couldn't fit this into the 7 minutes. Now, an almost universal perception of breakdown and corruption, whether you're on the left or the right or the center, this is an alarming time with this sense of breakdown and corruption. From a liberal perspective, Trump's ongoing crass and repugnant comments, trashing the democratic process, Giuliani's shady lawyering, oozing hair dye, farting in court, this sort of fits into the general complex of Pluto that we're immersed in right now. David Axelrod of CNN said, Trump is leaving the White House in a supernova of lies and corruption. He's really going for it, you know, Jupiter conjunct Pluto. And then his executive orders rescinding environmental protections, just incredible, damaging and short-sighted actions, permission to pollute the air, water, and soil that we all depend on. And thank you, Erica, for bringing up the apocalyptic catastrophe of the extinction of species. This is a terrible thing that's happening, and we are really in the fight for our lives as a species right now. Now, scatological images, the Liberty going down the toilet from a recent cartoon. And then here he is draining the swamp, but it's going into the water supply. From a conservative perspective, Washington as a fetid swamp, huge dumps of votes. This is more of just a sort of a wordplay, you know, connection with scatology, but his image of Washington as a fetid swamp, and he's somehow going to drain that swamp. A very effective cartoon from the right-wing point of view, showing him as draining all of that scatology out of the psyche. Of course, while it exists in the outer world, the main difference we can make is to clear that material out of our own psyches by facing it in sessions. If we remember this image of the onset of birth depicted as a descent into a whirlpool, then we could perhaps see, as Erica kind of alluded to in some way, Trump here as an unwitting agent of the Dark Mother, or Kali, who is overseeing a kind of forced death rebirth process of the progressive elements in society over the last 4 years. You know, this sort of puncturing of our idealism that, 4 years ago, and faith in, and so on, and then this amazing period of confrontation and self-introspection. And then finally, pyrocathartic themes. From a liberal perspective, the outgoing president attempting to burn down the system in spite a scorched earth policy. From a conservative perspective, out of control acts of arson during the anti-police brutality marches. This kind of arson, really does fuel a reaction on the other side. It doesn't help the cause, as opposed to peaceful, non-violent protests. Trump as a great purifier, and this would be related to pyrocatharsis, that Trump is melting away this sort of liberal opposition. On the positive side, in this last period especially, it's been a tremendous acknowledgement that there is a lot of unhealed shadow material in the collective psyche, an urgent need for more powerful inner uncovering processes. When you see how many people can be kind of misled by a demagogue like Trump, this is from my point of view, then you have to go, well, how we're in deep shit if that's inside of people. And so the problem again comes down to psychology, psychotherapy, self-exploration. And I will now turn it over to
hey, Lisa's here.
Okay, but how about if you go now, Kyle, and I'll make her a co-host so she can turn on her mic. Would that be okay?
Let's check in with Lisa. Let's just see.
Okay, if I can find her. Okay, just a sec. All right, I found her. Just a sec. Okay, Lisa, you should be good to go. I'd like to introduce Lisa. She was teaching a class at a university, and welcome, Lisa.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Ren, for inviting me, and nice to see the rest of the panel. I'm sorry that I joined a little late, and so I probably missed some fabulous discussions. So I know there may be some overlap, but I guess that's great, right? It just builds on everything. So again, I'm Lisa Virginia. I've been studying holotropic and archetypal astrology for about 8 years now. Today, I wanted to talk to you about, can you see this? Trauma. And I thought this is actually a really great setup from what Ren just put on for us, because what we're talking about now, right? We're transitioning from all of the external, everything that we just saw with regard to the great organization of these mind-blowing trends that we're seeing archetypally around us, but now constellating it within and inside so that we can get a sense of how can we work with this internally as well. So you're gonna have to apologize for these slides because I'm a teacher, so I might be talking you through it in a slightly different way. But basically what I wanted to talk about in this short presentation today is just a little bit about what I mean by trauma and post-traumatic growth in the context of this discussion, and then thinking a little bit about holotropic states and how they can help us to work with trauma. And then from there, we'll transition into talking a little bit about trauma work with the transits. And honestly, 2020 has been this amazing, perfect trauma recovery arc in a sense. So if you have stuff that needs coming up and you're proactive and you're ready to work with it, the transits and sort of the environment is here to support you in doing that, even if you can't actually get to, say, a psychedelic or a more holotropic in-person session. And then we'll go into a little bit about what the transits are asking of you. Okay, so with trauma, when I talk about trauma here, when we all have our own experience of it, but really one way to think about it is that it happens when we face circumstances that are beyond our ability to cope, right? So what happens is in the moment when we're bombarded with it, like even now, like all the things around us, if we're not even talking more childhood or long-term traumas, we dissociate. We pull away from those experiences because it's impossible in the moment to actually process it all at once. So we sort of pack it away, and then one by one, as we're ready, when we're feeling safe, if we have a protected environment and can take it on, then we can start unpacking that trauma, right? So when we think about post-traumatic growth, really that's the whole process of moving through, in many ways, all of the BPM stages that Ren was talking about, moving through to breakthrough, which is what we've seen in the arc of these massive transits over the past year or so, and longer, right? Some of them have been engaged for quite some time with larger orbs. So once we can actually integrate it, then we have this great release. So I want to be talking a little bit about that. I do want to say, anytime we talk about trauma, it's just so important to say, you know, everyone's is their own trauma, and also make sure that you have your own support when diving into more deep issues, right? Okay, so before we can move on to the transits, like I said, I just want to take a moment to review a little bit about holotropic states, because some folks may not have experience with it, or it might just be helpful for a refresher. Again, apologies if this was discussed in the first part of the presentation. But what we're talking about is it's a term coined by Stan Grof, but it's really a non-ordinary state of consciousness where you're able to sort of just click out of your humdrum life and an egoic view of the world and see these other types of associations, right? So what we're thinking is you can move more quickly and progress in this relatively quick timeline, as opposed to maybe mere talk therapy, because you can get in and really pull out all of the more somatic experiences and more deeper emotions that are associated with it. And really, if we want that sort of base level healing from trauma, that's the type of work that we're called to do. So, you know, some of what I just covered is under here under why are they relevant, but it moves us away from that personal identification of trauma with that egoic perspective. It's my trauma. It happened to me. It's not that it didn't, and it's not that you can't be pulled back into that from time to time. But as you move into the more archetypal perspective that's afforded to you through a holotropic state, then you can start to see it more as like, oh, this is our collective sorrow. This is grief. This is something that humanity's been going through, right? And so that allows that distance and processing, but also because it gives you this opportunity to process, like I said, these deeper things that have been held, and sort of make up a sense of who we are and our coping mechanisms that can get in the way. Maybe at the time, right, the coping mechanism was great. It helped us survive if we were in an abuse situation. Later on, now we have to work through that and unpack it. So getting into holotropic breath work, working through it in your own way in psychedelic sessions, great. However, we are in a time when it's really challenging to be able to do that because it's all the socially distanced stuff. And so I was thinking, what's another way to think about this? It's a holotropic window in a sense. And by the way, sorry, my dog is so, he's gonna join. He's barking in the background. Keep him a little quiet. So one way to think about this is sort of finding an opportunity for these different moments of processing, right? So you have these windows that can come up when you're triggered, when something sort of, I don't know, taps into the BPM 2 or 3, like we were discussing, like these folks are feeling maybe with regard to the more fringe groups, for instance, but in our own lives as well. You know, oh my gosh, I can't drive. This person in front of me is driving me insane. And that could sort of trigger you into this state of like empowerment, disempowerment, control, uncertainty, right? We just spiral off with all of the stresses these days. So when you have those opportunities, right, that's a way that you can start to think about, well, you know, what can I do in the moment so that I can take advantage of this while I have this experience welling up? Because if we take that and run with it, as long as we're in a safe place, as long as we have the chance to sort of process in a good way, it's a really wonderful opportunity. So I just wanted to encourage you to think about that as ways of punctuating your weeks, your days, right, into these sort of non-ordinary states where you're looking at things with that archetypal lens. And so why is this relevant to these transits that we're talking about today? Well, in short, the intense transits of 2020 are providing immense holotropic windows for us to experience this kind of growth over and over as we have another stress on top of another, working from home, working with the dog interrupting me, working with people at home with children. They're small, but they add up, right? And these are ways that we sort of are forced out of our routines, challenges our assumptions, tests our relationships, and we immediately can be thrown into these very, very deep and sometimes scary emotional feelings that have been in place for a long time because of repressed trauma that we have not dealt with. So again, this is a wonderful opportunity to deal with deep trauma if it's something that you have been struggling with for years and years. And we all have in our own way, right? So here is the arc that I was talking about, just sort of mapping out the trauma recovery. And so we have sort of this timeline with Saturn, Pluto, right? Kicking off things. These are the exact conjunctions that I have listed here, but I have wider 10-degree orbs presented in the next slide. But right off the bat, right? When we are invited in with Saturn, Pluto to view our trauma, right? That is the seeing and the feeling of the pain, maybe the initial memories if they come up, or just being reminded of things, feeling overwhelmed because there's just so much being triggered at once and it's sort of hard to maintain course. So with these conjunctions sort of kicking off these feelings within us and hitting on them again and again, over the course of, quite some time, that's sort of setting the tone. It's this like sort of tenor, this bass like beat behind all of us, right? That's sort of allowing us to go in and explore it. And you cannot avoid it anymore, right? If you wanted to, you can't. And my goodness, I have to say, I've been called to task time and time again when I thought I'd put something to rest and then it comes up again. So we can thank that for that, right? So that's sort of the basis, digging in, getting in there, pulling up that trauma. Then when we move along to the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, there's this sort of feeling of an opportunity to actually get to the depths that we need to see significant healing. So that means that you're going to see some of the most dark and terrifying stuff at times, but it's paired with this ability to find the inner strength within you to pull yourself up and to be able to actually make it through, right? To push through. And again, this sort of speaks to some of the BPM 2 and BPM 3 moving through these transits here, like Ren just set up so nicely. But it's knowing that that resilience is there, moving out of being stuck or unstuck. And again, I know this is sort of very top level, but again, it's sort of everybody's trauma is very different and very personal. So if you can sort of overlay it on anything that you might have been dealing with over the past few years, right? So the next upcoming, right, December 21st, exact conjunction for the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. The way that I've been thinking about this is that it almost feels like we've gotten used to the stress, to the things piling up upon us one after another, and accepting that it's really our responsibility to heal. This is not going away. Like, we've had to wait it out. There's a vaccine on the horizon. There's some changes maybe happening in our lives externally. That's an example of sort of a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, or feeling like all of that hard work and getting through to where we are now has paid off, right? And so we're committing to this self-care. We're observing the emotions that come up within us, and we're knowing that we're going to get somewhere, and we're kind of like steeled for however long it's going to take. But the nice thing about this is that soon enough on the horizon, as has been discussed, right, Jupiter-Uranus square is activating. That's like a 10-degree orb, like this week or something, right? I have it on the next slide, but it's soon. It's kicking in. And this is when, maybe we've been so stuck with a particular view of the world. We feel like there's no way out. We've had glimpses of hope, but we're still working. And then all of a sudden, there's this intense breakthrough energy that gives us another way of seeing ourselves, seeing the patterns. Maybe this person that was always a problem in our lives no longer is a big issue. They sort of like disappear. Or the job that we've always wanted to leave, we finally have the courage to do so. Or maybe we want to move, or maybe we've made some other internal progress that allows us to see things just differently and be happier. So the point is all of this stuff happening on the outside, if you're tending to yourself in these moments, in these holotropic states, when they arrive, collectively over time, we're going through this, equal opportunity, collective healing process, as it were. So I just wanted to pose a few questions that each of these sort of deities, shall we say, the archetypes ask of us as we're processing through each of these steps. So, Goddess Kali has emerged a few times now in discussion, and here she is again. But with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, oh my goodness, she's asking you, how are you going to surrender? Or no, she's not asking. She's not asking. You have to surrender, right? There's the longer you hold on, the more painful it will be. That's for sure. And then so you're also prompted, well, why do I want control? Why do I feel like I need to understand this or need to know where I'm going, right? The themes of uncertainty, I think Erica brought up, that's again throughout this. And the other thing is it okay to feel pain? We have to be comfortable in feeling pain and knowing that we're safe now. The problem, quote unquote, how trauma works, right, is it sort of encapsulates that feeling. It might be associated with like death and other awful things, depending on, near-death experiences, whatever types of traumatic you might have had. When it comes up, it's just as real, but knowing that you're safe here in the moment and you can go back and process that, and it's a step, right? So being okay with that. And then again, how can I endure, right? So as we move along, and we've had this sort of blow up of these feelings as with BPM-3 and such and the like, here are some other prompting questions. What have I avoided or that needs to be seen? And then again, the sitting with this darkness, but knowing that you have resilience. So trying to find those places within you to pause, to find those moments where maybe, you understand, you're gonna take a quick time out, all of this intensity is going on, I'm gonna breathe, do what I need to do, okay, back in, and I'm gonna hold that darkness for as long as I need to. But then the power to heal comes in as well. And then there's just a couple more. Jupiter-Saturn conjunction here, as I had mentioned, this commitment to healing, this commitment to showing up for yourself, to not forgetting about that thing, oh, that really bugged me earlier in the day, and not being like, oh, well, I feel better now because I can just turn on something on Netflix and like eat this chocolate and whatever. And no shade or shame on that. I mean, I do that too. But the point is like at a certain point, you can't do that any longer, right? And so knowing that this is the time to just grin and bear it, or at least bear it if you don't feel like grinning. And then, yeah, making these adjustments along the way to set us up to remake that reality. And then these other questions here, when something new and different just drops in your lap, it might seem easy enough. I don't have to do anything. But the thing is if we've been stuck in, say, a no exit situation like BPM-2 or something like that for so long, it's almost like you're coming out of this dark tunnel and you're like, wiping your eyes and can I do this? Is this for me? Is this going to just be more suffering? How do I know that I can act and take a step and sort of making some change in my life? There's can be fear around that. So being able to, again, surrender, let go into that uncertainty, but accepting and seeing again at that archetypal level that there's a change in outlook, right? There's something within you that now sees this as an opportunity when before you couldn't, right? So again, these are all steps in terms of moving through and out of more unprocessed or repressed traumas, wherever they lie as landmines sort of within you, allowing them to come up and then being able to see them out and through. And sort of, the thing is like the hope is on the horizon. I know it's not all over, but it is going to be a little bit more flashy and exciting. We'll have more options on the table. At least that's my hope. It's what I've seen so far anyway, a little bit too. So just in closing, I just wanted to say, this really is the work. I mean, I believe very strongly if you are not committed to really just looking at these difficult things within yourself, stepping into those moments, crying, punching the couch, even if you can't go into session, like I said, it's really upon us to do that, because how else are we going to shift these broader societal things that we're seeing unless we take that upon us, and then we can turn to others and sort of help them carry and receive it and not be so terrified as well, right? So it sort of raises all boats or whatever. I'm sure there's a more concise way of saying that metaphor. So anyway, thank you again so much. I don't know what you guys did at the very beginning, so I just included here a little bit of info about me. If you'd like to learn more, this is a super outdated website, by the way, but it's there and you can reach me. That's my other name that I was playing around with, having some fun with, the Mystic Midwife, helping birth you all into new self-awareness, and whoever wants to listen, right? So anyway, thank you so much. Yeah, that was really fun to be able to share with you. And I guess now I'm going to be handing it over to Kyle, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was great. Wow, what a great infusion of positivity and healing, and loved it. What I want to do is bounce over to the timeline and just kind of add some extra perspective. I think share that. So here's the triple conjunction, and then here's Saturn Pluto again from 2019, 2020 to 2021. And then here's the Jupiter Pluto that we saw earlier. And then here's the third part, the Jupiter conjunct Saturn, which is coming up. What I'm hoping for this is a peaceful transition of power. Laura Machete has mentioned Death of Kings before. And there's the Tecumseh's Curse and the assassinations of presidents and whatnot. And so I'm hoping everything remains transitioning. And then also I wanted to, let's zoom in a little bit to 2020 and add Mars, like Becca was saying. So here, let's go a day. Here was that first pass. Becca was talking about Mars coming through in March and April, and then it goes out, and then it comes back and it squares again, and then it goes retrograde and hits other peaks. And then we're looking at the final piece, the final 3 squares with the triple conjunction coming up around inauguration time. So I'm hoping that there's not too much violence that breaks out in the streets. So let's switch from Mars to Uranus. So there's the Jupiter conjunct Saturn coming up in December and January. And then we've got this really yummy Jupiter square Uranus, great breakthrough, genius, kind of new infusion of vitality moment. And then into 2021, we get mostly the Saturn square Uranus. And so we should be shifting out from the Pluto in the background, slowly shifting out, and Uranus coming in. And then if I zoom out a little bit, you can kind of see Saturn square Uranus is it's gonna be like the main thing for the next several years. Okay, so there's a couple more slides. What I wanted to follow up on, let's see, where is that key? Here we go. Okay, so here, let's see, play. So going back to COVID again, here's what we looked at with the US, because it's got the closest correlations. But if I want to kind of go around the world and look at different other countries. So here's Canada, daily new cases. And what I did at the bottom is I added in the direct and retrogrades, because for whatever reason, a lot of the European countries have 2 major waves, but they don't have a major spike like the US does as they were going retrograde. And so you see the first peak in April and May, they're going direct, and then they stop, and they go retrograde, and they align again, but you don't see a whole lot of correlation. And then they station, and then they go direct, and they peak, and then you see this other massive piece. And so this is a consistent theme that you'll see in Italy, the same thing. In Germany, they've got about maybe 18,000 cases, and it's flattened out. That's quite a bit. In the UK, in France has got a pretty solid spike going on that mirrors the alignment pretty closely. Hopefully it keeps going down. Spain. So here's where we see the first, what do you say, outlier. So you've got the first peak in April and May, and then it flattens out. And then Jupiter and Pluto are retrograde, but then this spike comes in Spain. And so I include this just to illustrate the complexity of the phenomenon. This is just one single slice. And I'm sort of also posing this as tentative research. If other people want to chime in on this, I'd like to know more. And then Switzerland, pretty tight correlation. Russia's got a little lag here in April and May, but they definitely do hit it. And then it kind of decreases until there's the station, that last station, and then the last peak. And then there's also the kind of the classical winter flu season, respiratory epidemic trends. And here's China. China is an outlier, and I would say they've got a pretty strong correlation with Saturn Pluto, which I should have added it in this graph, but Saturn Pluto peaks right around January, and they got hit first, and they only show about 4,000 cases a day. So they really, I think there's two things that are going on. They really clamped down. I mean, like they were welding doors shut on apartment buildings, and they've got incredible authoritarian response going on with the China Communist Party. But then also I wonder if we're seeing like accurate data. Are they underreporting? Because it's an open question. I don't know. So there's that. They definitely are not correlating with Jupiter, Pluto. And then there's a few more. India doesn't really correlate. I mean, it does at large, but it's also complexity. And then finally, Brazil doesn't also really correlate. I mean, there's kind of a lag and a buildup, then a drop down, and then there's also this last spike. And so I add these cases in just to kind of to go around the world and see some countries correlate in terms of the pandemic. There's a behavioral component to it. And yeah, so that's what I wanted to present there. And so I think, who's next? Amber.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to shift back to slideshow again, and let's see, hopefully I get this right. All right, let me start it there. Oh, I might have to start it from the beginning and get there. Yeah. Okay, so this is where I would like to start, and I'm going to set a timer so I'll make sure. Okay. Can everybody see this? Let's see. Can you see this? The screen share, the imagery that I added? Yes, okay, thank you. Okay, so really stepping out of, this fascinating, more conceptual, abstract space, which I love, which I think we all love, and asking you to kind of step into my more personal realm for a moment. So earlier I shared a dream, and I'd like to begin the second segment here, kind of just touching on some of the themes that came out from the dream work that I did. And I did dream work by myself. I did also work it with a very close friend of mine, and I also worked it in Jungian analysis. So I was kind of getting it in a lot of different directions. But what really came out, which was very obvious, was, the fear of death. And once again, the dream was reflecting a struggle, kind of mediating that archetypal energy. The element of uncertainty that so many people have mentioned was definitely present. I wasn't sure why I was in this sort of like, this neighborhood of death. And then it was interesting that the ancestral connection piece. So it was my grandmother, and this grandmother, she died when I was 5. And even when I was born, she already had a pretty advanced case of Alzheimer's. So I never really knew her. I never even got to hear her stories. So it was interesting to me that she was coming to me in this dream and showing me around her neighborhood where everyone was dying. And it made me wonder, like, did she experience a pandemic? Because I really didn't know. And so, you know, I had to double check even on the year that she was born. She was born in 1910. And sure enough, she had lived through the Spanish flu, which occurred 1918 to 1920. So she was 8 to 10 years old at that time. So I kind of had this feeling like I was getting communication about how that had affected her. And I also felt like I was getting protection from her going through this personally and managing my own fear and uncertainty. Interestingly, with the end of the dream and the encounter with the man who couldn't breathe. So this dream, and I didn't even put this together until I was making this presentation, until I was making the slide a few days ago. So I originally had thought that I had this dream in January, but when I looked it up, I actually had it in May. I had it May 23rd. And this was 2 days before the murder of George Floyd, whose words have become such a battle cry for this renewal of this theme of systemic oppression that we have seen for a long time, but this year have definitely seen it come back up and rear its head and demand to be looked at and dealt with again, which I think is a great thing. A difficult thing about this year, it's very challenging, but it needs to be looked at. It needs to be purged and processed. So I was kind of fascinating that there was a little bit of a precognitive. I didn't even connect that. So then, of course, difficulty breathing is the primary symptom of COVID. And then the song that ended up coming, and so I'm going to shift with the song a little bit out of the personal and into a little more transpersonal, archetypal through art. But the song was called Future, which was a collaboration between Madonna and Quavo. And I didn't really know the song. When I first heard it in my mind, I could hear the tune, and it was kind of a catchy tune. So I looked it up and ended up finding. So I took screenshots from a performance. This is from Eurovision Song Contest, which took place on May 18th, 2019, a year before I had this dream, a year before, I guess this would have been 6 months, about 6-7 months before the pandemic started really unfolding. But this song, so in this full performance, which I highly recommend you experience, it is an experience. It's like 10 minutes long. I wish I could show it because it's just so powerful, but I can't. But I will include a link in the chat box. But so it starts with a performance of Like a Prayer, which Ren mentioned earlier. And then it transitions into the song Future. So the first lyrics that struck me were, not everyone is coming to the future. Not everyone is learning from the past. Not everyone can come into the future. Not everyone here is going to last. And as you can see, there were dancers wearing gas masks. And interestingly, as the song transitioned from the performance of Like a Prayer was so Saturnistic. There are monks dressed in robes walking very slowly up these stairs, and they're moving these columns very slowly. And then there's like a pyrocathartic moment. And then all of these dancers are laid to waste, and then it shifts into the future. So some elements that strike me as, really standing out as these dancers are pointing to the future and they're pointing to the past. Some Saturn and Pluto for sure. Time, maturity and growth, karma and fate, the cosmic tunnel, the birth canal, and death. You can't really tell in this image so much, but in the background, there's this bright kind of rainbow colored tunnel, and it gives the effect of going in and coming out at the same time. So it manages to convey like past and present all at the same time. and future, I mean, and just really has a very mind-altering effect to even watch this performance. Here's another scene, which again, to me is just so Saturn Pluto. At the top, you see kind of like, it almost has a futuristic feel, but it looks like the buildings are falling apart. And at the bottom, it's really clear that there's this post-apocalyptic scene where everything has been laid to waste. So the lyrics that go around these scenes are welcome. Oh wait, first I'm gonna back up. So just to kind of outline the Saturn Pluto elements that stood out to me, severe cultural tension, splitting, cultural wars, profound releasing process. So that's what really resonated with this song and the lyrics. So the lyrics are, welcome to the future. It's a culture ride. Too much pain inside. It's an override. You've been putting too much time trying to survive. Don't like the person in your past, so you let them die. Let your light shine. It's the future. I really can't read that part right now because I have I have images over it, but you can see it is again reference to the future and what's being lost. And then it shifts to this sort of like cosmic scene, and the dancers are moving up the stairs, and they go up and go one by one, eventually off the top of the stairs, falling back, you know, like representing the death. But before they get there, this is kind of an interesting Jupiterian vibe, I think. You know, you have the king and the queen, and I don't know if you can really tell in this image because it's a little blurry, but Madonna's actually wearing a crown, and both she and Quavo are just like decked out in this sort of regal, you know, regalia. And at the end, the message shifts and it's this like hopeful, like the words are, we can light up the dark. Don't tell me to stop because you said so. Your future is bright. Just don't turn off the lights. Tell the sun not to shine because you said so. And at the very end, it says, wake up. And then Madonna and Quavo fall back into their own deaths at the top of the stairs. And I just found that incredibly, let me exit out of here. I just found that so moving. And that song, interestingly enough, I was kind of obsessed with it. Like I had to listen to it all the time. And it somehow brought relief to the anxiety that I was feeling. And I came to realize that it was a container for all of this intense energy that was running through me. And I just grabbed onto it and used it because I'm so grateful to be able to have that. So I'm going to move on now and pass it along to Becca.
I'm just so blown away by the amazing research that all of the panelists have brought forward. It's just so impressive and does such a great service to the discipline of archetypal astrology. So I just want to thank you all so much and feel really just honored to be participating in this. To go into this final round, the third round of panelists, I wanted to focus in on yet another one of the alignments that's been shaping this year, and that is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So we've really looked at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. We've looked at the triple conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto. The Saturn square Uranus has been focused on, Mars in the mix, Jupiter, Pluto. I mean, what a complex picture we have here. And I know, you know, for some of you who maybe are less familiar with astrology, this might be like coming into a foreign language class. And astrology really is a language, astrologos, the language of the stars. And so for those of you who might be newer to this perspective, I just want to encourage you to take in what you intuitively understand. Maybe you'll leave this presentation without remembering a single name of a planetary combination, but if there's a feeling of what each of us has brought forward that helps shape how you move through this last part of 2020 and into 2021, I think that's really what we're all aiming for. And that you can find something that helps support you in your life and helps make sense of what we've all been experiencing, both collectively and in our own personal, individual, unique ways. So to look at this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, Jupiter and Saturn have been in alignment with each other throughout this year, throughout 2020. And these two planets are the last planets visible to the naked eye in our solar system. So the conjunction of these two planets has held a very significant role throughout the astrological tradition. The conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter has been called the Great Conjunction because it is an alignment of the greats of our solar system, the two largest planets visible to the naked eye. And indeed, you can see them. You can see them getting closer and closer to each other night after night right now. And they're visible early in the evening. So it's a totally reasonable time to go out and see them. And I think this is such an important part of astrological practice, that we're not just looking at charts on paper or on computer screens, but that we're going out and viewing the spectacle of the night sky and are able to perceive these archetypal principles because of what these planetary bodies communicate to us directly in a phenomenological sense. So when you perceive the brightness, the golden glow of Jupiter, and you know that this is the largest planet in our solar system, and that it symbolizes that grandeur, that largesse, that expansive quality. And you see it right next to Saturn in the sky with its wan yellow light, the final planet visible at the edge of the solar system, signifying the end of the ancient cosmos, and its sense of contraction in as it stands next to Jupiter. Even from an astronomical perspective, it's extraordinary to think about the conjunction of these two massive bodies, that their gravitational pull actually has an effect on the sun itself, on the sun's rotation, on the output of solar energy. It's affected by the pull of Jupiter and Saturn when they're both on the same side of the solar system. So Jupiter and Saturn, the Great Conjunction, happens every 20 years. And we can see the correlations between Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions and significant social shifts, the ending of regimes, the beginning of new eras. We can see it, as Kyle brought forward, referencing Laura Marchetti, the fall of kings, the end of kingdoms, the end of civilizations. And so just looking back through the last century, the last conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter and Saturn was in 2000, Y2K, the turn of the millennium. Before that, it was 1981, also with Pluto in there. So a very interesting mirroring between 81, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto triple conjunction, and 2020, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto triple conjunction. Before that, 1961 was the Jupiter, Saturn conjunction. Then 1941, 1921. And so just thinking of these markers, these social markers, and these shifts of regimes and politics and economics that take place at these junctures. As Jupiter and Saturn get closer and closer together in these coming days, they will perfect their alignment on December 21st. So the winter solstice, the day in the Northern Hemisphere that is the shortest day, the longest night. It is the darkest time of year. And it is this moment in our cosmological journey with the Earth traveling in its orbit around the sun, where as the sun rises on December 21st, it appears to stay still those 3 days around the solstice. It rises in the same place on the horizon before making its journey back north and the longer days. And that's what solstice means. Sol, sun stands still. So the sun stands still at this darkest day of the year. And by exquisite cosmological synchronicity, that is the same day that Jupiter and Saturn make their exact conjunction. They've been coming closer together all year, and they will touch, they will kiss visibly, not literally, in the night sky. And this is the closest that they have appeared in the night sky since 1226, the year 1226, March 4th of 1226, was the last time these two planetary bodies appeared this close in the night sky. It will appear like a double planet. And so I want to encourage and invite all of you, whatever time zone you find yourself in, to go out under the night sky and view these two planetary bodies coming together in their conjunctio, in their sacred marriage right now. And the qualities associated with Jupiter and Saturn when they come together relate to a recognition of the limits that Saturn to growth. We're recognizing that we live on a finite planet, that we cannot have infinite growth on this finite planet. And so we have to learn to develop sustainable growth. How do you grow in a Jupiterian sense, but find that Saturnian sense of stability and maturity? This is the opportunity we're being offered right now. We can develop a sense of a slow striving towards abundance, towards a sense of wealth and riches that are grounded in the possibility of a kind of solid foundation where that growth and expansion can be sustainable, can endure in the long term. Jupiter-Saturn alignments tend to correlate with moments where there's a sense of judgment coming forward, jurisprudence, law, justice. There's a balancing of the scales taking place right now, a focus on ethics and morality, philosophical judgment. And Jupiter offers this gift when it's in relationship to Saturn. And this year, in relationship to Saturn, Pluto, it offers the ability to perceive the silver lining in the difficulty, or for there to be success after long effort, to find hope in the darkness. And throughout this year, something that I have noticed, on the one hand, we're seeing how Jupiter has had the effect of amplifying the Saturn-Pluto challenges and difficulties, globalizing the pandemic, for example. But Jupiter has also been that ray of hope that comes in. And I think it's taken all year to be able to compile the evidence. But in session after session of working with clients, I have started to notice this theme of these hidden gifts, these hidden blessings. They're not newsworthy. They're not ones that make the headlines necessarily, but opportunities that have come up, maybe for people to slow down in their work, to spend more time with family, to move to the place they've always dreamed of living, but they couldn't because their job required them to stay where they were. And now they have the freedom to be able to live in their dream home. People unexpectedly falling in love within confining conditions, or a new father having the opportunity to be home with his newborn child because suddenly his work comes out of his home instead of having to go to the office every day. I've seen so many different examples of this, and recognizing all the ways that Jupiter has acted almost like a field nurse or something in a battle, just patching up, offering gifts, blessings wherever possible. And this really is one of the beautiful opportunities that has shown through this year, that we can cultivate and create hope, light a candle in the darkness, light a candle at this darkest day of the year and ignite that in our hearts, because it's only in the most difficult, the most challenging moments that we really get to see what we're made of and what matters. And I think that is part of what the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction offers us the opportunity to bring forward. How will we balance the scales in our own lives and in the collective? That's what this alignment of these two planetary bodies invites forward from all of us. So I'll end there, and I now want to pass on to James.
Becca, thank you. On that very sweetly uplifting note, I'll look towards the future a bit in terms of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and also just some details that are worth noting about this year and the transition from this year into next year, in the sense that you know, the transits of the planets don't have any correlation necessarily with the year as designed by man, but by humankind. But the triple conjunction, just the way that the transits lined up, they lined up very well with the calendar year this year, oddly so. The triple conjunction really became very tight and active in January as we went into this year. And it really begins to kind of tease apart as we leave this year. And Jupiter, Saturn, they go exactly conjoined with each other, and they change signs, and they begin to move, put some distance between them and Pluto. And so the feel is really like 2020. I mean, we're not even out of it yet, but the sense that I have is that 2020 has a very characteristic quality to it that will remain to a large extent 2020, limited to 2020. We have this just kind of interesting to note. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunction goes exact right as we're getting to the end of the year. We cross the solstice. It goes exact. The year is ending. They also change signs. They're beginning to leave the triple conjunction, and they go into a tight aspect with Uranus, different energy, which will then be a part of 2021. So there's just a general shift. And also, just like Becca was saying, and I'm sure all my fellow colleagues have observed this, that in working with clients, there's a sense too of life shifts coming up, of the turn from one year to the next. 2020 and 2021 tends to invite in like these just changes, shifts. The energy shifts on a personal level, energy shifts on a collective level. You know, what are those shifts? Becca explored Jupiter-Saturn. Jupiter-Saturn, the conjunction there tends, Jupiter's growth, Saturn is constraint, and as they're coming in really tightly and changing sign as we're leaving this year, it tends to point towards like, you know, Saturn is constraint. What do we want to leave behind this year? What do we want to let go of? Jupiter's growth, like to the extent that we can pare down to what really matters, that which really matters has an opportunity to grow. As Jupiter, Saturn go in aspect to Uranus. Lisa also touched upon this. Jupiter going in aspect to Uranus is a breakthrough energy. You know, at the end of 2020, that's a welcome energy, a breakthrough energy. And then we have 2021, which is really very strongly colored by the Saturn-Uranus square. And that energy is an energy of a juxtaposition between forward thinking and like the future and the past, like technology, Uranus, simplicity, Saturn, freedom and excitement, Uranus, and practicality and commitment, Saturn. And so I just want to throw those out there, some things to note that, you know, going from 2020 to 2021 is a pretty abrupt transition, a fairly marked change. And, you know, the energies are much more Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus in 2021, whereas they were, you know, very Saturn, Pluto in 2020. And so yeah, it's just there's some kind of aesthetic beauty to appreciate there, that you have this really intense transit that really kind of just happened to get captured within the 2020 calendar year, and how it really kind of leaves at the end of the year with some abrupt different energies. So anyways, I just want to point out those shifts there, and I'm actually going to yield the remainder of my time to my esteemed colleagues, starting with Erica Jones here.
Thank you, James. We are drawing down on time, so I'm going to maybe just offer a couple more thoughts, throw a few more things into the cauldron for us to consider. You know, I had mentioned a general, well, I had mentioned social media earlier, or sources of news information that are made possible by Uranian technological advancements, leaps, and that pursuit of the new, the shiny, the quicker, the faster, and Saturn coming in a square, showing us some unintended consequences or problems. But I would also expect a general reckoning of our technological aspirations with the actual realities of life on Earth. And, you know, I don't want to suggest that there shouldn't be a diversity of ideas, perspectives, and so on. That's actually vital. A paradigm shift is needed. It's on the way, it's happening. But there's that problematic Saturn aspect to notice. You know, we can use Saturn as critical thought, fact-checking, verifying, like forging a solidity that will allow our imagination to actually take flight and to co-create a new world, instead of Saturn hijacking our imagination with fear, with you know, various manipulations. Saturn can snap back on our flights of fancy, one-up our confirmation biases, and kind of force some reality down our throats. So it's a very messy and imperfect process, to be sure. And so that, you know, the clash between freedom, Uranus, and responsibility, Saturn, I think that's something for everyone to consider. The kind of clash of culture that, you know, touts all this freedom, and individual rights, but zero attention to the incredible responsibility that comes with that. That's the promise of democracy, is freedom. But it seems that in many places and times, the responsibility aspect has been lost. And I will just end with an interesting description of the Kali Yuga. It's a Hindu concept of the Iron Age, and an idea that we are in a time that is degenerating. Things are falling apart, so that it's cyclical. It's a cyclical idea, so that something new can be born, right? But we're in it. We're in the falling apart. And one of my spiritual teachers, Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche, suggested that instead of thinking of it as a degenerate age, perhaps as a volatile age. It's a volatile time. Many different things could happen. And so perhaps to not hang as many negative connotations on the idea of the Kali Yuga, or the plutonic or regenerative process that we're in, that in fact we can bring our values, our deepest values, forth to bear on this situation. And indeed, times like these call forth our deepest values and what we want to bring forth, hopefully with care and compassion and concern. So I will leave it at that, and thank you everyone for your attendance and participation, and I shall pass to Rin.
Thanks, Erica. Wow, what a feast for the soul this is. And I'm just enjoying the synergy with all of you so much. Thanks to you who are hanging in there with us, the audience. We'll be sending out the recording to all of you, but thanks for being there live. It means a lot to us. Okay, I'm going to finish my slideshow by looking at Uranus and BPM 4. How's that? You see that? James? Yep. Okay, oh, great. Thanks, Becca. Okay, so the liberation from the threat of death and the decompression of space and reconnection with the mother and the divine are the essential elements of BPM4. Rick was able to make the correlation with Uranus. In archetypal astrology, we don't see Uranus as a marker of trauma, like in some other schools of astrology. I can see how people might have seen it that way, because during Uranus transits, it's just hard for us to keep things bottled up. And that could be the moment when things break out of it, you know, in not the easiest ways. But if we're pursuing deep self-exploration, then we come to really cherish and look forward to these transits, because they always represent another opportunity for rebirth, for transcendence, for healing, coming to a new level. So a sense of opening and awakening, ecstatic feelings of rebirth, renewal, redemption, and forgiveness, feelings of planetary citizenship and universal sisterhood and brotherhood. People have these experiences. Connecting with celestial light, harmony of the spheres, peacock feathers of brilliant white or blinding light as people are reliving these rebirth experiences. The inside of giant halls and cathedrals that depict the opening and decompression of space as the infant exits the birth canal. Being held in the hands of the great mother goddess. We can identify with the rebirth of Persephone, of Christ, of Osiris, Dionysus, and other deities. We can feel a sense of reconnection with the Divine Mother in the form of Isis, Demeter, Lakshmi, Mary, and other cultural personifications of the Great Mother Goddess, or with God, or the divine in a more abstract form. Several movies that really depict this BPM4 feeling are Titanic. It's such a redemptive movie. This scene of sort of flying at the front of the ship was a blessed moment for the entire culture, a sense of transcendence, being liberated out of a constricting lifetime that she would have lived if she hadn't met him, and with the element of water involved in it. The Truman Show, also during the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, exiting the small microcosm into the more real world, exiting the Maya world into the realm of real human love. And it is a cinematic depiction of this famous Flammarion engraving, leaving the everyday world and entering the world of the first causes or archetypes. And then one of my favorite gems, directed by Jane Campion, holy smoke, if you haven't seen this, what a redemptive movie, just incredible. Also wonderful sense of humor in this movie. Now, perinatal themes engaged by the COVID-19 pandemic. Look at Uranus and BPM4 now. The promise of blessed relief coming from the imminent vaccines. You know, when Jupiter and Uranus came within orb of that square, this most recent past that we're in, corresponded quite closely to the announcements of the vaccines being close. And it has changed the tone to one of, we just have to get to that point, you know, but Uranus is in the picture. From a liberal perspective, the importance of following medical science and facts, i.e. the Promethean side of life, over partisan emotionality and dangerous brainwashing, trusting science. From a conservative perspective, Trump was right about rounding the corner, I guess is how people would see that. Now, the Trump presidency and the election and the Uranus archetype. From a liberal perspective, before the election, desperate yearnings for change and deliverance. I mean, we'll never forget just the feeling of importance of that election, you know, for the rest of our lives. And then after the election, the decompression and release of pressure, successful survival of the democratic process. I mean, it's 99.99% sure now. He's still trying to stage a coup with the electors and Congress and so on, but I think it's very unlikely that that will happen. Many state officials, including Republicans, acknowledged for showing great integrity in withstanding pressure to overturn the legitimate results of the election. And as Rick Tarnas wrote to me recently, the moral center held, a blessed moment, and thank God for the moderate majority in society that can resist the bifurcation and the tendency to politicize everything. Potential return to normalcy, decency, intrinsic human values of kindness, tolerance, respect, appreciation of diversity. Again, Biden's ideals of healing and unity. The Trumpist rebellion against normalcy and decency seen as a misplaced view of the way forward. That is not the way forward for humanity. And then Trump's natal sun, Uranus trine Jupiter, lending itself to messianic projections and Midas touch inflation. He shares with Shatner, William Shatner, the great actor who played Captain Kirk, Sun conjunct Uranus. Shatner has square Jupiter, Trump trine Jupiter, this sort of golden boy going beyond where no one has gone before, the sort of, full of oneself and so on. Shatner in a, very appealing way. Trump, from a liberal perspective, not so much with Trump. Now, dramatic breakthroughs in the area of civil rights and female empowerment in the election of Kamala Harris as vice president. What an incredible breakthrough for the civil rights movement, potential for the feminist movement for female empowerment. The potential for an urgently needed Green New Deal. This could happen. What a moment that will be if they win the Georgia primaries. And even if they don't, it will begin. From a conservative perspective, many people have seen Trump as a messiah restoring the 1950s paradise or fantasy about paradise, or as leading people to the promised land. I mean, people actually see him that way. Attempted restoration of white privilege and male privilege. People have a desperate need to overcome these memory imprints and the terrible fear of death within them. And so white privilege, male privilege are attempts to kind of bolster one's ego and gain some kind of power over nature, power over others, but it in no way solves this deeper problem of our mortality, of these traumas within us, and actually gives us an opportunity to create negative karma if we have that kind of power. So it's understandable why people want to grab their privileges and run with them, but these things do not solve the greater problems of life, the problem of death and the need to reconnect with the divine. So Trump as a rebel hero unbound by convention, a standard line when people are interviewed at Trump rallies is, we just can't take orders. There's a highly activated Uranus right now, that Pluto Uranus. And, he received the rebel vote in 2016. It could have just as easily gone to Bernie Sanders. People just wanted to rebel, so that gives us hope that this is not just a kind of a dark energy, is how liberals would see it, that is going to continue, but a lot of it is this Uranian rebellion, desire for a change. Now, finally, an opportunity for people to freely express and be comfortable with their shadow emotions, especially anger and selfishness. Trump made it okay to be, redneck, to be racist. He's like, he made fun of it. He made it like a fun thing for people to get in touch with those feelings. And, in very negative ways, in divisive ways in our society. One brief shining moment that was Trump-a-lot. That's a reference to Camelot, and that's how some people will look back probably at this 4-year period. Now, the intolerable return to normalcy. Don't bottle us and our feelings back in. People are desperate to keep that wave going, to feel their feelings and have that be okay, their shadow emotions. Don't go back to the normal everyday world, because then that just means they have to stuff those feelings back in. But there's another way. There's a third way. And people have talked about this Saturn-Uranus tension between, let's say in this case, repression and acting out. The third way is you can feel those feelings and express them in healing sessions, in deep self-exploration where you don't create karma. And that really is the way forward here. This sort of manic determination to continue the fight, and reminiscent of Scarlett O'Hara, the Southern protagonist in Gone with the Wind. Tomorrow is another day, you know, like never give up. This is a kind of Uranian inflection. And then just, you know, my comment to Trump supporters, I know this is a very painful time for people. There are even people in the new age that voted for Trump. We do need a change. Something has to give. We just can't keep going like this. But my opinion is the way forward is deep self-exploration, not political extremism. Your feelings are accurate. Your feelings are legitimate and valid, but I feel that people have been misled and manipulated by a demagogue, and that is not the way forward. So I had an image of a Confederate flag while I was thinking about this presentation this week, and it was suddenly ripped open by a fast-moving covered wagon stampeding toward a land rush. It's like it blasted through. And I felt that it was, you know, these fantasies, especially in the South, about the lost pre-Civil War paradise, which really is a major underlying force in the culture wars still. That is now being replaced with a new incentive, a new land rush, the opportunity for personal healing. Many people have talked about this tonight. Overcoming the negative imprint of BPM-2 and BPM-3 and the fear of death, and accessing divine consciousness. This is something we can all do. And you know, it's part of the American psyche, this dream of incredible opportunity and, you know, fast-moving pursuit of happiness, you know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But in this land rush, this new land rush of healing, everyone can have oceanfront property. It's a variable sum activity. Your healing only benefits everyone else, and it takes nothing away from anyone. The spirituality that emerges is of a non-sectarian, non-denominational, universal, and all-encompassing quality. It's not fundamentalist, it's not sectarian. These are very beneficial qualities in society for people to access the divine. It solves a lot of problems and a greater chance for them to be happy and to want and not to overcompensate with materialistic overconsumption and so on. Deep self-exploration is a win-win pursuit. As I said, every healing breakthrough benefits everyone. And I want to conclude with this amazing observation by Rick at the Cycles and Symbols conference in February 1997 in San Francisco. Patriarchy is the 5,000-year birth canal of the great mother goddess. We're in a kind of collective birth labor, as people have talked about tonight. And this is the most exciting part of it, right? Happening before our eyes right now. When he made that statement at the conference, he projected onto the screen this amazing painting by Karen Motan, sort of the birth of a new humanity, a more sustainable and peaceful way of living on this earth. So I'll just, we're not ending here, but we're close. But thank you for participating, and we will send you a link to this recording. Thank you, and I will turn, Lisa, if you are, really do want to pass on your turn, then I'll turn this over to Kyle. Lisa, do you want to say something?
I was going to say, in the interest of time, I don't have a bunch more to add. I mean, so much has already been said, and this is just so amazing to see it all in concert. So I would just make one small reflection before handing it on. Just that I know that some folks might be interested in doing this type of work, and obviously we're in internal work, and we're in a phase where it's a giant field. All these planets are in such conjunction, but with Mars moving through and squaring all of these again as it has turned retrograde, moving through Aries, I think it's going to start ticking off some of these feelings again, so you can sort of have more pointed experience of this again to help you integrate. So it's sort of this final pass, like I think through February, and as all of this is sort of unfolding that we've been talking about. So it's another chance to access these more transformational forces within us as well. So I'll leave it at that, and then we can pass it on.
Kyle, that's you, brother.
No? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can. Okay. Yeah, so I feel like I want to end on a positive note. I'll be brief. I live in Sedona, or outside of Sedona, and it's a dark sky. So I'm watching the night sky every night. And yeah, the Jupiter Saturn conjunction is amazing. One of my fun things I like to do is try to orient myself in the cosmos. So right after sunset, you'll see Jupiter and Saturn, and then you'll see Mars kind of over, and like you can kind of like imagine the ecliptic in between. And you know, it's kind of like a regular exercise for me to imagine where the North Pole is, orient myself to Earth, and then figure out where the ecliptic is, and it's kind of at an angle and kind of orient. Anyways, that's a fun thing. 2020 feels kind of like a collective near-death experience. A lot of people died and are dying, and a lot of us have come really close to dying, you know, or like family of loved ones. And it seems like near-death experiences, you know, they sort of like revitalize an appreciation of the little things, and it's humbling and sort of reprioritizing. And so I'm hoping that the outcome of this is like sort of a maturation of humanity, like a kind of like a coming down from this crazy infinite growth, spin away industrial complex thing. And also the data says that COVID's still pretty crazy right now. So keep it up with, at least for the next like 2 to 3 months, with your basic precautions. For me personally, it feels like, since it's kind of like the sunset period of this whole triple conjunction, I'm going to be doing more reflection, and I'm excited about 2021 as far as like an infusion, freshness, you know. So there should be a shifting there. And yeah, so thanks everyone, and it's been a lot, and I'll pass it on to Amber.
Yeah, thank you. I really liked that uplifting vibe, and it is so important to get out and just stargaze and remember our place and how small we are and how big we are at the same time. So I do have a very brief, 3 more slides that I'm going to just run through very quickly. Let me get this going and get back there. Okay, so I just wanted to, briefly return to this idea of mediating archetypal energies. And I want to say too, that so often it seems like if you have a psychedelic therapy practice, or if you do holotropic breath work, so often it just feels like we have to wait for these big holotropic opportunities. But I really think it's important to integrate the smaller practices and engage in smaller ways all the time, so that we're constantly expanding ourselves beyond our personal and growing it a little bit. And it can be a tricky thing to do. So there can be times when it can be overwhelming and kind of expand too much and then contract back down. So it's important to, have practices like yoga or exercise, even just going for hikes. I love this picture of this woman meditating next to her dog, because one of the things that came through with this year, pets have just like skyrocketed. People have been getting pets. And I just think that's a really beautiful way, that we're connecting even more. And I certainly connect through pets and value that very much. But I also wanted to
Amber, you're temporarily frozen. Hopefully she'll be able to come back. Yeah, you're still frozen, Amber. We'll just give this another minute or two. I guess I just want to say, somebody responded to my Trump comments. You know, we're all in this together. We have to learn to live together in this world. And I'm just trying to understand the sort of different viewpoints. Is she offline? We'll just give her another minute to come back. Any other presenters want to just banter for a minute? Oops. Camera's off. I love your cabin in the woods there, Lisa.
Yeah, it's really cold here.
I'd like to get one like a volcano or something like that, or planets in outer space. That would be great. Okay, we'll just give her one more minute, okay?
Ren, are we in the closing comments section of the presentation?
Okay. Okay, Becca. Yes. Let's do that. We're now gonna give our closing comments, and she can do that too if she gets back on. Go ahead, Becca.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I mean, I wanted to say thank you all to the audience, the participants, for being here. It's just an extraordinary turnout, and it's really been wonderful to share this space with all of you. And special thanks, of course, to the panelists. Just beautiful, well-researched presentations. I learned so much from each one of you. And yeah, just in closing, I guess we talked about in our farewells, just saying, you know, how to be connected to us. My website is just my name. It's beccatarnas.com. So everything I do is available there. I offer monthly forecasts of the upcoming lunation cycles transits. So if you ever want to hop in and join on one of those, all the information is available at beccatarnas.com. I'm wishing you all a beautiful evening. Thank you again. And thanks especially to Ren for organizing this.
Thanks, Becca. Thank you, everybody. It's the time and energy, actually time and attention is the commodity of these days. So I'm really honored that to have spent it with you, with fellow presenters. If anybody wants to explore on a little deeper level, the overlap with how archetypal astrology fits into the personal journey work of psychedelic healing, and how that synthesis has larger implications for kind of the collective healing of our world and ecosystem. I'll be, let me just put my information here in the, I'm going to be running a webinar. And so I'm going to put my information in the chat box so you can have my contact information and the upcoming webinar, which is just free and open like this one. And thank you again, everybody. Thank you to Ren, because this has been such a wonderful opportunity. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
Yes, I will join the chorus of gratitude for a wonderful evening, and for all the different insights. I feel much more holding all of Saturn and Uranus instead of the kind of churning feeling. Thank you. And you'll find me at realimaginal.com. I'm Erica Jones. And I'll be launching a year-long course called the Community Prism. If you're interested, registration will be up, and other events that I offer are also available on my website. And I'll throw the URL in the chat. And I will pass to Ren. Or no, sorry, to Lisa. Lisa.
Thanks. Yeah, again, thank you so much, Ren, for organizing all of us. And it's just been such an honor to present with all of you, and amazing to see all of the synergies and how everything came together. And if you'd like to follow me, I am picking up my Instagram again, but I'm going through a rebrand, and my former name, I'll probably still keep it at some level, is The Mystic Midwife. I got a couple direct message questions. So if you're curious, I can just show you right here. It's themysticmidwife.com. That's where you can look at my posts and readings. And then you can also direct email me at either of these. So I can put it in the chat box too. But yeah, so thank you again so much. It was lovely to share an evening with you. Thank you.
I'd like to say thanks too. And all of my work is at archetypalexplorer.com. And that's where I pour all my energy into. So thanks again, Ren. Thanks again, everyone, for showing up. It's been amazing. And off to Amber. Oh, wait, she's not here. Did you come back?
No, I've been looking for her, but she's not back on. Yeah. Thanks for this quality time. You've all been wonderful. It's wonderful to see the audiences. Thanks for those of you who have your cameras on. It's great to see so many friends. Hi, Carmen. Friends from Victoria, really great to see you. I'm most impressed by the quality of these presentations that, makes me want to get into astrology. Hi, James Cunningham, my bro, big brother James, and then James Moran is a little brother James. It's been a really fun evening. I didn't mention one correlation, which is that Trump's Jupiter is conjunct the U.S. chart Saturn. I discovered this a while back. Maybe someone else has seen it. So it's like the moral center holding the checks and balances. The integrity of the moderate majority has resisted his, what I see as, megalomania, inflation, attempts to have it all, forever. So thank goodness for that. My website is renbutler.com, and I'm doing a year-long course starting in September, and I do readings as well. I'd recommend readings from every one of the panel members here. So if you can afford to do that, treat yourself. Thank you all so much. And let me see if I can turn your mics on. We can all just say a quick goodbye.